Grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's get started. Okay, so this happened a couple of years back, maybe 3. Time gets blurry, but some things you just don't forget. This is one of them. I still wake up sweating sometimes thinking about it. People around here, especially the older folks, they talk. They whisper stories about the woods, about things moving out there that ain't deer or bear or cougar. I always figured it was just old wives' tales, you know? Scare tactics to keep kids from wandering off too far. I'm Samuel, by the way. Been logging around Lewis County my whole life. Grew up here. Thought I knew every tree, every trail, every critter in those woods. I was wrong. See, there's this old logging road, been closed off for years. The county put up barriers, said it was too dangerous, washouts and all that. But those roads, they go deep. They get you into places where you can still find good timber, places that haven't been picked clean yet. So sometimes, when things were slow, I'd take my old Ford pickup, the one I practically built myself, and I'd sneak past the barriers. Just a little ways in, mind you. Never too far. Just enough to find a few good trees, keep things going. This particular day, it was late fall. Crisp air, leaves turning, that smell of damp earth and pine needles, you know. The kind of day that makes you feel alive, even when you're working hard. I'd gone in further than usual, maybe a mile or 2 past the barrier. The road was overgrown, branches scraping against the sides of the truck, but nothing too bad. I was driving slow, windows down, listening for the sounds of the woods, hoping to maybe spot a buck, even though hunting season was over, just enjoying the quiet, you know, the kind of quiet you only get way out there. No traffic, no people, just the wind in the trees. Then I saw movement. Off to my right, down in a bit of a gully where the road banked up. At first, I thought it was a deer, something big, brown. But it wasn't moving like a deer. It was clumsy, almost, like something was struggling to get up. I slowed the truck, engine idling, and watched. That's when it happened. That's when I saw it properly. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. It was... I don't even have the words for it, honestly. It started to rise up from behind this little ridge of dirt and scrub bushes, slowly at first and then faster, until it was standing upright, taller than any man, taller than any bear I've ever seen, and I've seen some big bears in these woods. It was covered in hair, thick, matted, dark brown hair. Not fur, not like an animal. It was coarser, more human-like, in a way, if that makes sense. But it wasn't human. God, no, it wasn't human. Its limbs were thick, powerful. I could see the muscle moving under that hair as it stood, and its shoulders. They were massive, hunched forward, like it was used to being on all fours, but now it was standing straight. Then it turned its head, and I saw its face. That's what really got to me, the face. It was flattened almost. No snout like a bear, no long muzzle like a dog, just flat and wide. And the eyes, they were set deep, dark, and they were looking right at me. I mean, right at me, like it saw me, saw through me. There was intelligence there, but not human intelligence. Something else, something primal, fear. That's the only word for what I felt. Not just scared, terrified, like every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, to get the hell out of there. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, just stared at this thing. It stood there, just as still as me for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. We were locked in this stare down. Me in my truck, it on the side of the road. And then it made a sound. It wasn't a growl, not a roar. It was a cry, but not like any animal cry I've ever heard. It was deep, guttural, started low and built up, almost like a howl, but wrong, painful, desperate. It echoed through the woods, bounced off the trees, seemed to vibrate in my chest. It wasn't aggressive, not exactly, more like startled, confused, like it was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it moved. It didn't charge, it didn't come towards me. It turned, and it leapt. From the side of the road it jumped, like it was nothing, over the embankment, down into the thick trees. One moment it was there, this massive hairy thing staring at me, screaming. The next it was gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all, except for the sound still ringing in my ears and the terror still clenching my gut. I sat there, engines still idling, truck still in gear, for what felt like a long time, just staring at the spot where it had been. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I couldn't think straight, couldn't make sense of what I'd just seen. Slowly, like I was moving through water, I put the truck in reverse, backed up until I was facing back the way I'd come, and I drove. Didn't stop, didn't look back, just drove, all the way back to the main road, back past the barriers, back to normal, or what passes for normal around here. I got back to the logging camp, parked the truck, and just sat there for a while, staring at nothing. My son Mark, he came over, saw my face. "Dad, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to brush it off, said I'd just had a close call with a deer, but he knows me too well. He could see I wasn't right. And then his girlfriend, Sarah, she came out too. They both started asking questions. And, well, I just blurted it all out. Everything. About the road, about the thing, about the face, the cry, the jump, everything. They looked at me like I was crazy. Mark, he's always been more practical, more down to earth. Sarah, she's a bit more open-minded, I guess you could say, but even she looked skeptical. "Dad," Mark said, "you sure it wasn't just a bear? Maybe a really big bear?" "Mark," I said, "I know a bear when I see one. This wasn't a bear. This was something else. Something wrong." They argued with me for a while, tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe it was just shadows and my imagination. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew it. And the more I talked about it, the more convinced I became. And strangely, they started to get, not convinced exactly, but curious. "Okay," Sarah said finally after a long silence. "Okay, Dad, let's just say you saw something unusual. What do you want to do about it?" I didn't know. I really didn't. Part of me just wanted to forget the whole thing, pretend it never happened, go back to work, chop some trees, and get on with my life. But another part of me, well, I couldn't just let it go, not after seeing what I saw. I don't know, I said. Maybe we should go back. Just take a look. Just to see if there's anything there. Tracks, anything. Mark sighed. Sarah looked at Mark, then back at me. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Dad, we'll go. But we're going together, and we're taking the truck, and some lights." So, we went. It was already getting dark by then. Sun was setting, casting long shadows across the camp. Driving back down that road, even in my own truck with Mark and Sarah with me, felt different. Felt heavy. The woods seemed darker, quieter. The air felt colder. We got back to the spot, or what I thought was the spot. It all looked different in the fading light. Trees cast long, weird shapes. Every shadow seemed to move. We got out of the truck, turned on the headlights and the spotlight, swept the beams across the trees, the road, the gully. Nothing, just trees, brush, dirt, nothing out of the ordinary. Mark was shining his flashlight around, kicking at the leaves. "See, Dad? Nothing, probably just a bear, like I said." I wasn't so sure. I looked around, trying to find something, anything, to confirm what I'd seen. Tracks in the mud, broken branches, anything. But there was nothing. It was like it had never been there. Then the sounds started. It was subtle at first, just rustling in the trees, like the wind picking up. But there wasn't any wind, The leaves on the ground were still, the air was still, but the rustling, it got louder, moved closer, like something was moving through the trees, around us. But we couldn't see anything. "What's that?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight. She grabbed Mark's arm, squeezed it hard. Mark shone his flashlight into the trees. "Probably just squirrels," he said, but his voice was shaky. He didn't believe it either. Then the branches started breaking, not snapping, like when a tree falls, but cracking, splintering, like something heavy was pushing through them, violently, and the sounds weren't random. They were deliberate, like something was smashing its way through the woods, towards us. And then there was the murmuring, low, deep, guttural sounds, not animal sounds, not human sounds, something in between, something unholy. It started soft, barely audible, then grew louder, a chorus of whispers, growls, clicks, all mixed together, unintelligible but threatening, menacing. "What the hell?" Mark said, his voice cracking. He was shining his flashlight wildly now, spinning around, trying to see what was making the sounds. But there was nothing, still nothing, just darkness, trees, and the sounds, all around us. Sarah started to cry, silent tears running down her face. She was clinging to Mark, her whole body shaking. I felt it too, that creeping cold dread, the feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, close, closer than we thought. The murmuring got louder, closer. It was all around us now, like the woods themselves were speaking, in a language I didn't understand, but I knew deep down that it wasn't meant for us. It was something ancient, something angry. Then came the banging, loud, sharp cracks, like something was hitting the trees, hard, like it was pounding on them with its fists or claws. The trees shuddered with each impact. Branches rained down around us. That's when I knew we had to get out of there now. This wasn't squirrels. This wasn't wind. This wasn't anything natural. This was something else, something malevolent. "Get in the truck," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Now, get in the truck." We scrambled, tripped over roots, stumbled in the dark. Sarah was sobbing. Mark was cursing under his breath. We piled into the cab, slammed the doors shut, locked them. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip them. Got the key in the ignition, turned it, engine roared to life. I didn't even put it in gear properly, just slammed the gas pedal, tires spinning in the dirt, gravel flying. We lurched forward, back onto the road, bumping, bouncing, careening down the overgrown track. Branches whipped against the windshield, scraping against the sides of the truck. I didn't care, just drove, as fast as I could. The sounds followed us, cracking branches, booming impacts, that low, guttural murmuring echoing through the trees. They seemed to be getting closer, closing in, like whatever was out there was chasing us, hunting us. I kept the pedal to the floor, truck roaring, engine screaming, tires fighting for traction on the loose dirt and rocks. We flew down that road faster than I'd ever driven it, faster than was probably safe. But I didn't care about safe. I just wanted to get out, get away, get back to lights, people, safety. We finally burst out onto the main road, tires squealing on the asphalt. I didn't slow down, just kept driving. Faster, faster, until we were miles away, until the woods were just a dark line in the rearview mirror, until we were back in town, back in Dolly, back in civilization. We drove straight to my place, parked the truck in the driveway, went inside, locked the doors. We sat in the living room in the dark for a long time, just breathing, trying to calm down, trying to make sense of what had happened. We didn't talk much that night. Couldn't. We were all too shaken up. Sarah was still crying, quietly now. Mark was just staring blankly at the wall. I just felt empty, numb, and cold. Bone cold. Even though it wasn't cold in the house. The cold was coming from inside me. We didn't go back to the woods after that. Not to that road, not to that part of the forest. Mark and Sarah, they tried to convince themselves it was just our imaginations, playing tricks in the dark. But I know better. I know what I saw, and I know what we heard. I still log, still work in the woods, but not there, not near Dolly anymore. I can't. Something changed that day. Something shifted. The woods, they feel different now, darker, more alive, but not in a good way, in a way that makes your skin crawl. And sometimes at night, when the wind is blowing and the trees outside my house are rustling, I hear it again, faintly, far away, but I hear it, that low, guttural murmuring, and I remember the face, the cry, the woods coming alive around us, and I know deep down that whatever it was, whatever we saw out there, it's still out there, in the dark, watching, waiting. And I know, with a cold certainty that chills me to the bone, that we weren't supposed to see it, we weren't supposed to be there, and we were lucky to get out alive. I still can't explain it, can't make sense of it, and to this day, I have no idea what it was. But I know one thing for sure, there are things in those woods that we don't understand, things we're not meant to understand. And sometimes it's best to just leave them alone, leave them in the dark, where they belong. That's all I got. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but it happened. I swear it did, and I'll never forget it. Never. Story 2. First few days were nothing, just quiet nights in the trailer they'd set up for us, deep in the woods. We were parked near this little, out-of-the-way lake. Pretty place during the day, even with all the construction stuff around. On August 1st, it was a Saturday, and since we were stuck out there anyway, we figured, why not fish? Went down to the lake in the late afternoon. The sun was starting to go down, painting everything gold and orange. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of quiet where you could hear every little sound, the buzz of insects, the water lapping at the shore. Maria caught a couple of small trout, released them. We were just enjoying the quiet of it all. Then it happened. It was like someone just ripped the piece apart. These screams, unlike anything I'd ever heard, cut through the air. Not human screams, higher-pitched, wilder, full of something else. They echoed all around us, bouncing off the trees, making it impossible to tell where they were coming from. Both of us froze, lines in the water, just staring at each other. My blood went cold instantly. It wasn't just the sound, it was the raw terror in it. Like whatever was screaming was in unbelievable pain, or pure fear, or both. It was bone-chilling. We just stood there, listening. The screams went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped as abruptly as they started. Silence again, but it was a different silence now. Heavy. Like something had shifted in the woods, and we were suddenly aware of it in a way we weren't before. Maria's face was pale. "What was that?" she whispered. I shook my head, my heart hammering in my chest. "I don't know. I honestly had no idea. We'd heard animals in the woods before, coyotes, maybe a cougar once in the distance, but nothing, absolutely nothing that sounded like that." Then, another sound. Not a scream this time, but moaning. Low, guttural moans that seemed to come from deeper in the trees. They weren't regular, they were spaced out, uneven, and just as unsettling as the screams. It felt like something was out there, close and deeply distressed. I started to feel that prickle on the back of my neck, that instinctual warning that you're not alone, that you're being watched. We didn't say anything else for a long minute. We just stood there, listening to the moans, and the woods seemed to close in around us. Finally, Maria said, her voice shaky, Let's go back to the trailer." I didn't argue. My fishing pole felt heavy and useless in my hand. We reeled in our lines fast, not even bothering to properly put away our gear. We just turned and started walking quickly, almost jogging, back towards the path through the trees that led to where we'd parked the truck. That's when it got even weirder. We were moving fast but carefully, trying not to trip in the dimming light. Suddenly, there was this thrashing in the trees right next to the path. Branches cracking, leaves rustling like crazy, and this dark shape burst out of the undergrowth right in front of us. I yelled, jumped back, ready to defend myself against whatever it was, a deer, a bear, I didn't know. But it wasn't an animal attacking us, it was a duck, just a regular, scared, wild duck, flying right out of the woods in a blind panic, and it flew straight into the side mirror of our truck, which was parked on the edge of the path. Crack. The mirror shattered, glass spraying everywhere. The duck just dropped to the ground, stunned for a second, then scrambled up and flapped off into the trees on the other side of the path, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. It was so sudden, so bizarre, that we just stared at the shattered mirror for a moment. It was like something out of a bad movie, that whole dramatic Omen thing, a terrified duck flying out of the woods to its doom right in front of us. It felt wrong, seriously, deeply wrong. Maria was white as a sheet. "Did you see that?" she breathed. "What the hell was that about?" I didn't know. I really didn't. It was just unsettling on top of everything else. We practically ran the rest of the way to the trailer, got inside, locked the door, even though it was just a flimsy travel trailer door, and just stood there, breathing hard, listening. The woods outside were silent again, just the normal evening sounds of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But the fear, that icy knot of fear, stayed in my gut. We didn't sleep well that night. Every little creak of the trailer, every rustle outside made us jump. The next few nights were the same, quiet mostly during the day. We tried to act normal, go about our duties, check the equipment, walk the perimeter, whatever. But after dark, things changed. The forest seemed to come alive in a different way, not with the normal night sounds of animals, but with something else. Whispers, moans, rustling that was too heavy to be wind, always just at the edge of hearing, just at the edge of sight, making us feel like we were being watched, constantly, from the darkness beyond the trailer walls. One night, maybe the fourth or fifth night, we decided to check out the equipment shed. It was one of our nightly checks anyway, supposed to make sure no one was messing with the logging machines. It was a big, open-sided metal shed, full of bulldozers and skidders and all kinds of heavy equipment. It was located deeper in the woods, a little further away from the trailer. We took our flashlights, even though we both felt uneasy about leaving the trailer after dark. We figured, be quick, check the shed, and get back inside. We walked through the woods, the beams of our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Everything felt amplified at night. The shadows seemed darker, the trees taller, the silence deeper. We reached the shed, the metal structure looming black against the night sky. I shined my light inside, sweeping it across the heavy machinery, checking for anything out of place. Nothing. Seemed normal. Then Maria gasped beside me. "Ed, look." Her voice was tight with fear. She was pointing her flashlight towards the back corner of the shed, deeper in the shadows. I swung my own beam over there, and then I saw them. Eyes, two of them, reflecting back the flashlight beams. Red, glowing red in the darkness. They were high up, maybe 8 or 9 feet off the ground, and wide apart. Not like deer eyes, which are usually more golden. These were deep, blood red, and they seemed to burn in the dark. They were just there, watching us. Not blinking, not moving, just 2 red dots in the blackness of the shed. We froze. Our hearts slammed in our chests. I could hear Maria's breathing, shallow and fast. We didn't speak, we didn't move. We just stared at those red eyes, and they stared back. It felt like an eternity, like we were locked in some kind of silent, terrifying standoff. Then a sound, a low moan, coming from the direction of the eyes, not loud, but deep and mournful, like something in immense pain or sorrow. The same kind of moan we'd been hearing in the woods. It sent shivers down my spine. It was close, too close. Slowly, so slowly it felt like time itself was dragging. I started to back away, pulling Maria with me. We didn't take our eyes off those red dots. They didn't move. They just watched us retreat. We backed out of the shed, out into the open clearing, still facing the shed, flashlights still fixed on those eyes. We kept backing away, step by step, until we were back in the woods, hidden by the trees. Only then did we turn and run. We ran, blindly, stumbling through the dark back to the trailer, adrenaline pumping, fear screaming in our ears. We slammed the door shut behind us, locked it, and leaned against it, gasping for breath, shaking like leaves. We didn't go outside again that night. We didn't sleep. We sat huddled together in the trailer, listening to every sound, jumping at every shadow, our minds racing, trying to make sense of what we'd seen, what we'd heard. Red eyes in the dark, moaning in the woods. What the hell was going on out there? Then came August 7th. It was dusk, that in-between time when the day is fading, but it's not fully night yet. Maria had gone outside to, I don't know, just get some air, I guess. I was inside the trailer making coffee, trying to calm my nerves. Suddenly Maria screamed. A real scream, a scream of pure terror that ripped through the quiet evening. It was the same scream she'd made at the lake, but worse, more raw, more desperate. I dropped the coffee pot. It clattered on the counter, hot coffee splashing everywhere. I bolted for the door, threw it open, and ran outside. Maria was standing a short distance from the trailer, pointing towards the small creek that ran just beyond the clearing. She was trembling violently, her face contorted with terror, her eyes wide and fixed on something in the creek bed. "What is it? What happened?" I yelled, my voice hoarse. She couldn't speak, she just kept pointing, shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I followed her gaze to the creek, and that's when I saw it. Down by the creek, partially hidden in the shadows of the trees, was a creature. It was huge, massive, bigger than anything I'd ever seen outside of a zoo. It was crouched down near the water and it was drinking. I could hear the slurping sound of it lapping up the water. It was hard to make out details in the fading light and the shadows, but the sheer size of it was undeniable. It was like a giant ape, but not like any ape I'd ever seen in pictures. It was broader, thicker, with incredibly long arms and massive shoulders. Its fur was thick and shaggy, a dirty greyish-red colour, almost like the bark of an old tree. It was so big, it looked like a moving tree trunk in the gloom. The way its fur stood out, all bristly and thick, was terrifying. It looked powerful, immensely powerful. I stood there, frozen, staring at this thing. My mind just couldn't process what I was seeing. It was too big, too strange, too out of place in the woods of Washington State. Maria was still screaming, a high-pitched, continuous shriek of pure animal fear. The creature lifted its head, its movement slow and deliberate. It turned its head towards us, and I could see its face, even in the dim light. It was brutish. Heavy brow ridges, a flat nose, a wide, lipless mouth that seemed too big for its face. And its eyes. They weren't red like the eyes in the shed. These were dark, deep-set, and they seemed to bore right through us. Intelligent, but in a way that was utterly alien, utterly frightening. It stared at us for a long, agonizing moment. Then it stood up. Slowly, deliberately, it rose to its full height. And it was enormous. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over me, maybe 8, 9 feet tall, maybe more. It stood there, dripping water from its mouth and fur, staring at us with those dark, unreadable eyes. Then it roared, not a lion's roar, not a bear's growl. It was something else entirely, a deep, guttural bellow that shook the air, that vibrated in my chest, that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. It was a sound of pure rage, pure territorial threat, and it was deafening. Maria collapsed, right there on the ground, still screaming, but now it was mixed with sobs. I don't know what came over me. Survival instinct, maybe. Adrenaline. I grabbed Maria's arm, hauled her to her feet and started to run. We ran, blindly, desperately, back towards the trailer. The creature roared again, louder this time, and I could hear heavy crashing sounds behind us, like it was moving, coming after us. We stumbled into the trailer, slammed the door, fumbled with the lock, finally got it secured. We threw ourselves against the door, panting, terrified, listening. The crashing sounds got closer, louder. We could hear trees snapping, branches breaking. It was coming right for the trailer. Then, a deafening crash right outside the trailer wall. The whole trailer shook, rattling on its blocks. We screamed, huddled together, waiting for the walls to cave in, for whatever was out there to break through and get us. But it didn't. The crashing stopped. Silence again. Heavy, oppressive silence. Except for our ragged breathing and Maria's whimpering. We stayed like that, pressed against the trailer door for what felt like hours, listening, waiting. Every rustle, every creak, every snap outside sounded like the creature coming back, getting ready to attack again. We were trapped, terrified, completely at its mercy. Later that night we heard more sounds. Not crashing this time, but movement, heavy footsteps circling the trailer, sniffing sounds right outside the walls. We could hear its breathing, heavy and ragged, just inches away. It was circling us slowly, deliberately, like a predator toying with its prey. It went on like that for hours, circling, sniffing, sometimes a low growl, sometimes just silence. We were trapped in that tiny trailer, surrounded by something enormous and unknown, something clearly hostile. Something that seemed to be studying us, testing us. We were too terrified to move, too scared to even whisper. Finally, sometime in the pre-dawn hours, the sounds faded. The circling stopped. The sniffing disappeared. The forest grew quiet again, the normal quiet of early morning. We stayed huddled together until the first light of dawn crept through the trailer windows. Then, slowly, cautiously, I went to the window and peeked out. Nothing. The clearing was empty, the trees were still, no sign of anything unusual. Except branches broken, trees pushed over near the creek, signs of immense weight having moved through the undergrowth. It looked like a hurricane had passed through, but only in a small area around the creek and the trailer. We waited until full daylight before we dared to open the trailer door. We stepped outside into the bright sunlight and it felt unreal. Like the night had been a nightmare, and we'd just woken up. But the fear was still there, thick and heavy in the air, and the broken branches, the disturbed ground, the shattered side mirror of our truck, they were all too real. We spent the rest of that day in a daze. We didn't go near the creek. We barely left the trailer. We were supposed to work for a couple more weeks, but we knew we couldn't stay. Not after what we'd seen, what we'd heard. That night things were quieter, but still tense. We heard rustling, distant moans, but nothing as close or as terrifying as the night before. The next day, we went out during daylight to try and figure out what we'd encountered. We found tracks near the creek, huge tracks, bigger than my hand, even bigger than my boot. Three-toed, but not like bird tracks. Thick, deep impressions in the soft earth, and broken branches everywhere, twisted and snapped like twigs. We also found structures. Strange, crude lean-tos made of branches and woven together with vines, like nests, but built for something huge. They were hidden deeper in the woods, away from the logging area, almost like they were trying to stay hidden, but watching us. We tried something stupid, in retrospect. We took a plastic construction cone from the work site, and in the late afternoon, we went back to the edge of the woods, near where we'd seen the creature. I cupped my hands around the narrow end of the cone and tried to imitate the moaning sounds we'd been hearing, low, mournful, guttural sounds amplified by the cone. And we got a response. From deep within the woods, a moan answered us. The same sound. A chilling, mournful moan that echoed through the trees, and then another closer, and then another from a different direction. It was like they were answering us, communicating, using the same sounds. We backed away slowly, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. We didn't need to hear more. We knew then, with a sickening certainty, that we were not alone out there, that something else was in those woods with us. Something big, something intelligent, something terrifying. We finished out the week, barely sleeping, always on edge, listening to every sound. As soon as our 2 weeks were up, we packed our bags, loaded up the truck, and got out of there. We didn't say a word to the logging company about what we'd seen or heard. Who would believe us? We just left. That was years ago now, 2003. But I still think about it, all the time. Those screams, those red eyes, that creature by the creek, those mournful moans echoing through the woods. I know what we saw, I know what we heard, and I know there are things out there in the woods, in the wild places, that we don't understand. Things that are bigger, stronger, and scarier than anything we can imagine. And sometimes they watch us, and sometimes they let us hear them. I still can't explain it, and I still don't want to go back to Riff Lake, ever. Story 3. Okay, so this happened a few months back. I still get chills just thinking about it, and honestly, I haven't really talked about it much because, well, who'd believe me, right? Or even worse, what if they do? Anyway, I guess this feels like a safe space, and maybe someone else has gone through something similar, I don't know. My friend Beth and I decided, like, spur of the moment to go camping. We both needed to get out of the city, just breathe some real air, you know. We picked the Misty Mountains in Arkansas because we'd seen pictures online, and it looked beautiful. All these forests and trails sounded perfect for a long weekend. I even brought my 2 dogs, Max and Lucy, my German shepherds. They're usually balls of energy, fear nothing, literally nothing phases them. The first couple of days were awesome, exactly what we needed. Hiking during the day, campfire at night, stars were incredible. Everything was totally normal, peaceful even. Then came the last night. It started subtly, I guess, like as the sun went down, the usual forest noises, crickets, owls, you know the drill, just faded out. It got eerily quiet. And I don't mean like a peaceful quiet, it was more like a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. Beth noticed it too. We were sitting by the fire making s'mores, and she kind of just stopped talking, looked up into the trees and was like, "It's really quiet tonight, isn't it?" I shrugged it off then, saying maybe the animals were just settling in for the night early, whatever. But deep down, I felt it too. Something felt off. Then the sounds started. Not like animal sounds, not anything we could recognize. It was weird. Sort of like rustling, but too heavy to be leaves, and sometimes almost like dragging. But then there were other times it sounded like cracking, like branches snapping way off in the distance, but too frequent to be just the normal settling of the woods at night. And the thing that really started to get to me was my dogs. Max and Lucy are usually all over the place, always exploring around the campsite, sniffing out every little thing. But that night, they stuck right by the fire, close to me and Beth. They wouldn't even go off to pee without us. That's completely not like them. And they started acting agitated, pacing around, low growling under their breath, their ears perked up, constantly scanning the tree line. They were clearly spooked. And these are dogs that have faced down raccoons, squirrels, even a freaking deer once without batting an eye. Nothing scares them. But whatever was out there, something was seriously freaking them out. We tried to ignore it, you know, classic denial. We told ourselves it was probably just a raccoon, or maybe a bear sniffing around, even though we were in a designated camping area and kept everything packed away properly. But the sounds just kept coming, and the dogs' behavior was escalating. They started whimpering softly, pushing themselves against my legs, burying their heads into my lap. It was heartbreaking to see them like that, and honestly, it was scaring the crap out of me. If my dogs were this terrified, something was seriously wrong. We put out the fire earlier than usual. We just didn't want to attract any whatever was out there, you know? We scrambled into the tent, zipped it up tight, even though rationally I knew a thin piece of nylon wasn't going to stop anything determined to get in. Beth and I were lying there in our sleeping bags, both completely on edge. The sounds outside the tent seemed to get closer, more frequent. The rustling, the dragging, the snapping. Sometimes it sounded like things were moving in circles around our tent, just outside the perimeter. It felt like hours, just lying there, listening, holding our breath, waiting. Waiting for what? We didn't even know, just waiting for something. Then it happened. I don't know what time it was pitch black, but I woke up suddenly. Not from a sound, just woke up, like my body jolted me awake, and I had this feeling, like ice water in my veins, a cold dread just washing over me, goosebumps everywhere, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, this intense, primal feeling of being watched. And not watched like someone's looking at you from across the room, watched like your prey, and something is right there, studying you, deciding what to do. I held my breath and slowly opened my eyes. It was completely dark inside the tent, except for the faintest hint of moonlight filtering through the nylon. And that's when I saw it. A shadow against the tent wall, right next to my head. It wasn't moving at first, just a dark, elongated shape. And then it moved, slowly, deliberately. It wasn't the wind moving the tent flap or anything like that. This was something pushing against the tent from the outside. My heart went into overdrive, pounding in my chest, so loud I thought it would wake Beth up. I wanted to scream, to yell, but I was completely frozen, paralyzed by fear. Then I saw it clearer in that dim moonlight. The shadow wasn't just a blob. It had fingers, long, thin, skeletal fingers, like branches, but not. They were pressed against the tent fabric, right above my head, and I could see them, just barely, outlined in shadow. And then, the worst part. I felt it. The slightest, almost imperceptible pressure against the tent, right above my head, like those fingers were touching the tent, just brushing it, softly, deliberately. I squeezed my eyes shut, wanting to disappear, to just cease to exist. My bladder suddenly felt like it was going to explode. Seriously, the most ridiculous thing to think about in that moment, needing to pee. But it was there, urgent, distracting. For a split second, I actually considered just peeing right there in my sleeping bag, anything to avoid moving, to avoid acknowledging what was outside that tent. But the discomfort was getting worse, and the fear, unbelievably, was making me need to pee even more. And then Beth whispered, her voice barely audible, trembling. "Anya, are you awake?" Her voice was so quiet, so full of fear, that it snapped me out of my paralysis just a little. I managed to whisper back, Yeah, I'm awake." She didn't say anything for a second, then, "Did you hear that?" I swallowed hard. "Hear what?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what she meant. I just didn't want to admit it out loud. I especially didn't want to mention the shadow, the fingers. I was terrified she'd think I was losing it, that I was imagining things. "Everything," she whispered back. "The noises. It's freaking me out." Then she said it. The exact same embarrassing, ridiculous thought I'd had just moments before. "I really need to pee," she whispered, "but I'm so scared to go outside." Relief washed over me, a bizarre wave of relief. She was scared too. It wasn't just me. I wasn't going crazy, and she needed to pee just as badly as I did. Misery loves company, I guess, and needing to pee together in a terrifying situation is bonding in a weird way. I took a shaky breath. "Okay," I whispered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Okay, we'll go together." I fumbled for my flashlight in the dark, grabbed the bear spray we had, for bears, obviously, not whatever this was, and tried to sound reassuring even though my voice was shaking. "We'll be quick, just stay close to me." I unzipped the tent, slowly, carefully, trying not to make any noise. The dogs hadn't moved an inch from their spots at the foot of our sleeping bags. They were still trembling, eyes wide, staring at the tent flap like their lives depended on it. When I unzipped it enough to peek out, the darkness was overwhelming. even blacker than inside the tent. The moon must have gone behind the clouds or something. It was thick, suffocating blackness, and still completely silent. The strange rustling sounds, the snapping, everything had stopped. The silence was even more terrifying than the noises had been. "Come on," I whispered to Beth and fumbled to get out of my sleeping bag. She was right behind me, flashlight shaking in her hand. "Max, Lucy, come on," I said, trying to sound normal, but my voice cracked. The dogs didn't move. They just stayed huddled in their sleeping bag nests, looking at us with these pleading, terrified eyes. "Max, Lucy, outside!" I said, more firmly this time, tugging at their collars. They still didn't budge. It was like they were frozen solid, completely paralyzed. I'd never seen them like this. Never. I had to literally drag them, pulling and pushing, to get them out of the tent. They resisted the whole way, whimpering, trying to pull back into the tent. It was like getting them to jump out of a burning building, not just step out of a tent to pee. Finally, we got them outside. They immediately tried to bolt back into the tent, but we held onto their leashes tight. They were shaking so badly I could feel it through the leashes. Beth and I shone our flashlights around, the beams cutting through the darkness, but we couldn't see anything. Just trees, shadows, bushes. Nothing out of the ordinary visually. But the air felt different. Heavy, cold and charged. Like right before a storm, but without the wind or rain. "Come on, let's just go," Beth whispered, her voice tight with fear. We started walking towards the little trail we'd used earlier for a bathroom break during the day. The dogs were dragging their feet, whimpering with every step, pulling back on their leashes. They wanted to go back to the tent so badly. But we kept moving, deeper into the woods, guided by the shaky beams of our flashlights. We went a little ways, found a spot behind some bushes, did our business as fast as humanly possible. We didn't even talk, just quick glances at each other, both our faces white in the flashlight beams, eyes wide with fear. The silence was still heavy, suffocating. No crickets, no owls, no wind, nothing. Just silence. And the feeling of being watched, intensely watched. As soon as we were done, we practically sprinted back to the tent, dragging the still terrified dogs behind us. We scrambled back inside, zipped up the tent, and collapsed into our sleeping bags, breathing heavily, hearts still racing. The dogs immediately burrowed back into their nests, still shaking, still whimpering. We lay there for the rest of the night, not saying a word, just listening to the silence outside, waiting for the first hint of dawn. Neither of us slept, not even a wink. As soon as the sky started to lighten, we were up, packing everything in record time. We didn't even make coffee, didn't bother with breakfast. We just wanted to get the hell out of there. We didn't talk about it on the drive home, not a word. It was like some unspoken agreement. Maybe we were both too freaked out. Maybe we were embarrassed, I don't know. But we just drove in silence, both of us exhausted, on edge and deeply disturbed. It was weeks before either of us brought it up. Just casual conversation one day, talking about camping, and Beth just said it. That last night, in the Misty Mountains, that was really scary, wasn't it? And I just burst out with it, told her everything, the shadows, the fingers, the feeling, the dogs, everything. And she just nodded and told me she'd felt it too. She'd heard the noises, felt the dread, seen the dogs' fear, and felt just as terrified as I had. She hadn't seen the shadow, but she admitted she'd been too scared to even really open her eyes after she woke up. She'd just wanted to disappear back into her sleeping bag and pretend it wasn't happening. We talked about it for hours that day, comparing notes, trying to make sense of it. But we couldn't. We still can't. We didn't see anything, not really, just a shadow maybe. But the feeling, the fear, that was real. And the dogs' reaction, that was undeniable. They were genuinely, utterly terrified of something that night. I don't know what it was. I don't know what those sounds were or what those fingers were against the tent. I don't know what made my dogs, my fearless dogs, act like that. And honestly, I don't want to know. Some things are better left unexplained, buried in the darkness of the Misty Mountains. All I know is I will never, ever go back there again. And I still can't shake the feeling, even now, that whatever was out there that night is still out there, watching, waiting. Story 4. It was back when we were just kids, 19 maybe. We thought we were hot stuff, you know. Hunting, out in the woods. That was our life. We knew the woods around Morgantown like the back of our hands, or so we thought. This was near the Kelvin Space Center area, but way out in the swampy parts, back roads nobody really used. We were young and dumb, needing extra cash and some meat for the family, so we were doing a bit of night hunting. Deer and boar were plentiful back then, and if you were quick and quiet and knew the right spots, well, you could fill your freezer pretty fast. It was illegal, yeah, night hunting with spotlights and all that, but we were careful, thought we were invisible. That night was black as pitch, no moon at all. Perfect for what we were doing, we figured. We had our shotguns, 12-gauge pumps, loaded and ready. Each of us had a good headlight strapped to our heads, plus we'd rigged up these extra spotlights to our guns. Big, blinding beams of light. Made you feel like you could cut right through the darkness. We were walking down this old dirt road, just a single lane really, cuts right along the edge of the dark swamp. You could smell the swamp even then, that earthy kind of rotten smell, mixed with dampness. We were walking side by side, flashlights sweeping into the trees, just talking low, mostly about what we were going to do with the meat, Mama's recipes and all that normal stuff. We hadn't seen anything yet, just a few sets of eyes reflecting way out in the distance. Probably deer. But then, that's when I first heard it. It was faint at first, barely there, but I picked it up because the woods go quiet at night, real quiet, except for the frogs and crickets. This was different. It was like a footstep, just one, kinda muffled, coming from the swamp on our right. I stopped, and Rob stopped too, looking at me, questioning. "Hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, listening hard now, and there it was again. Thump. Just a single heavy footfall deep in the brush, keeping pace with us. It wasn't rhythmic at first, just occasional. We both swung our gun lights towards the sound. Those beams ripped through the darkness, cutting back the shadows, but they didn't cut through everything. The swamp there was thick, man. Palmetto bushes, cypress knees sticking up, vines hanging everywhere. It was like a wall of green and black, even with those spotlights. We couldn't see past the first few layers of trees and bushes. We held our lights steady, pointing into the swamp, our ears straining for another sound. Silence, just the crickets and the distant croaking of frogs and the buzzing of night insects. "Must be a deer, maybe," Rob mumbled, but he didn't sound convinced, and neither was I. Deer don't make a sound like that when they walk. Deer are light on their feet. This sound was heavy, deliberate. We started walking again, slower this time, more cautious. And then it started again, that thump. And this time it was synchronized. Every time we took a step, it took a step. Thump, thump, thump. Just one footstep for every two of ours. It was definitely coming from the swamp, staying just out of sight. We'd stop, and it would stop. We'd move, it would move. It was keeping pace, like it was walking right alongside us in the thick of it. Now we were both properly freaked out. We kept sweeping the lights back and forth, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, trying to make sense of it. "Probably a boar. Maybe a big one," Rob said again, trying to sound braver this time, but his voice was still tight. I didn't answer. Boars can be big, sure, but they don't move like that. And boars grunt, they snort, they make noise in the brush when they move. This thing was silent, except for that single heavy footstep. No breaking branches, no rustling leaves, just that thump, like something big was placing its foot down carefully, deliberately. We kept walking, slowly now, the road curving gently. We knew this road. We knew it led to a kind of turnaround point a little further on, where the swamp thinned out a bit on one side before going back into deep woods. We were hoping to reach that spot, get some more visibility, maybe figure out what the hell was following us. The tension was building with every step. My heart was hammering in my chest. My hands were getting clammy on the shotgun. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, even though it was a cool night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves in the breeze sounded amplified, menacing. It was like the swamp itself was watching us, breathing down our necks. We reached the turnaround, a wider spot in the road where you could see a little further into the swamp on the left before the trees closed back in. We stopped, both of us turning to face the swamp, guns raised, lights cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just trees and shadows and the black water reflecting our beams back at us. But the sound, it stopped too. We stood there, frozen, listening. Silence again, except for the insects and the frogs. It was like, whatever it was waiting for us to stop, waiting for us to make a move. The quiet was worse than the footsteps somehow. It felt like we were being watched, studied, like we were prey, and something big and unseen was stalking us from the shadows. "Okay, screw this," I said finally, my voice low and shaky. "Let's get back to the truck." Rob didn't argue. He just nodded, his face pale in the beam of my headlamp. We started backing up slowly, keeping our guns pointed towards the swamp, our lights fixed on the tree line. We didn't want to turn our backs to whatever was out there. We backed up all the way to where we'd parked the truck, a beat-up old Ford pickup we'd borrowed from Rob's uncle. We kept expecting something to burst out of the trees, something monstrous, anything. But nothing came. The footsteps didn't start again. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. We reached the truck, and for a second I felt a rush of relief. Almost there. Just get in, start the engine, get out of here. But as soon as I reached for the door handle, I heard it. The truck. It sounded wrong. And then I saw it. The back right wheel, sunk deep in the soft shoulder of the road, down in a ditch we hadn't even noticed in the dark when we parked. "Shit," Rob hissed. Just one word, but it said everything. We were stuck, out here, in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, with something unseen watching us from the swamp. That feeling of relief vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, heavy dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. We tried rocking the truck, gunning the engine, but the wheel was just spinning, digging deeper into the mud and muck. We were going nowhere. We needed to jack it up. Rob rummaged around in the back of the truck and pulled out the jack, a rusty old thing that looked like it hadn't been used in years. We started working frantically, setting up the jack, fumbling in the darkness, our hands shaking. The silence was back, thick and oppressive. No footsteps, no sounds from the swamp at all now, just the squeak and groan of the old jack as we started to lift the truck. Every creak of metal, every rustle of leaves in the breeze sounded like it could be something else. We were jumpy, our nerves frayed, our eyes constantly flicking towards the darkness of the swamp. It felt like it took forever to jack up the truck. Time stretched and warped. Every second felt like a minute, every minute like an hour. We were working in a frenzy, fueled by fear, desperate to get the truck out of that ditch and get the hell out of there. We used some branches and rocks we found to try and build a ramp under the tire. Everything was slow, clumsy, agonizing. While Rob was working on the back wheel, I kept watch, gun raised, flashlight sweeping the swamp, trying to see, trying to hear something, anything. But there was nothing. Just the darkness, the trees, the silence. But it was a knowing silence, a silence that felt heavy, expectant, like something was still there, watching us, waiting. Then, just as we were about to try and get the truck out, we heard it. A sound, finally. But not footsteps. This was different. It started low, a deep, guttural growl, coming from deep within the swamp. It was low at first, almost a rumble, but it got louder, deeper, more menacing, building in intensity. It was like something big, something powerful, was waking up, stretching, getting ready to... something. The growl echoed through the night, vibrating in the air, rattling our bones. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It wasn't like a bear or a wolf, nothing I'd ever heard before. It was deeper, more primal, more wrong. It sounded ancient, angry. It felt like it came from the swamp itself, rising up from the mud and the darkness. Rob froze, his hands still on the wheel. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't answer. I didn't know. My mind was blank, just pure, raw fear. The growling continued, getting louder, closer. It sounded like it was moving towards us, through the trees, breaking branches now, snapping twigs, the sounds of something big and heavy pushing its way through the undergrowth. "Get in the truck," I yelled at Rob, my voice cracking. I scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, trying to get them in the ignition, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold onto them. Rob jumped in the passenger side, slamming the door. I jammed the key in, turned it, and prayed the engine would start. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. I threw it into four-wheel drive, slammed my foot on the gas, and the truck lurched forward, spinning its wheels in the mud for a second before catching traction and tearing out of the ditch. We were thrown back in our seats, bouncing and jarring over the rough ground, the tires spitting mud and gravel. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just drove, fast as I could, back down that dirt road, the headlights bouncing wildly through the trees. The growling was still there behind us, fading slightly as we put distance between us and the swamp. But it was still there, in my ears, in my head, a deep, resonant rumble of something monstrous and unknown. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back on the main highway, pavement under our tires, streetlights shining above us. We pulled over at the first gas station we saw and just sat there, panting, shaking, not saying a word. The lights of the gas station, the sound of traffic, the familiar world around us. It felt surreal, like we were waking up from a nightmare. We drove back to town in silence. When we got to Rob's place, I just nodded at him, and he nodded back. No words needed to be said. We both knew. We'd heard something that night, something in that swamp that wasn't right. Something that shouldn't have been there, something that hunted. We never went back to that part of the dark swamp again. Not ever. We still hunt, both of us, but we stick to the daylight now, and we stay away from the deep woods, especially near the swamp. We'll talk about hunting, about deer and boar, about guns and gear, just like any other hunters. But we never talk about that night. Sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet and I'm lying in bed in the dark, I still hear it. That heavy footstep keeping pace with me, and that growl, deep and guttural, rising up from the darkness. And I wonder, what was it? What was out there in the dark swamp that night? I still don't know. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Some things are better left in the dark. Some things are best left undisturbed in the shadows of the swamp. And whatever was out there that night, it felt like it belonged to the dark. Like it was the darkness itself taking form, and I pray to God we never hear it again. I truly do. Story 5. See, I was around 50 back then, in 2014, had a good life, owned place in Metairie, worked as a mechanic, kept to myself mostly. Always loved bikes, the feel of the road, the wind. Finally got myself a Kawasaki Vulcan 800, used but in good shape. Man, that bike, it was freedom. Used to take it out on weekends, just ride, clear my head, you know. This particular weekend, I decided to ride up to Albany to see my folks. It's not a crazy long ride, a couple hours maybe, and they always loved when I came over. Spent Saturday with them, helped Dad in the yard a bit. Mom made a huge dinner, you know how it is. Family stuff, nice and normal. Left their place around 10 at night. Dinner was good, visit was good, and I was feeling relaxed, maybe even a little sleepy from all that food. Usually I'd just hop on I-55 to get back home, quick and easy. But this time I thought, nah, let's take the scenic route. Stupid me. Scenic turned into something else. I decided to take Highway 51. It runs parallel to the interstate for a while, but it's way out in the sticks, especially once you get past Ponchatoula. It cuts right through the Maripaz Swamp Wildlife Preserve. Figured it'd be a nice change of pace from the highway hum. 2-lane road, not much traffic at night. Probably some nice dark views of the swamp. I wasn't expecting a National Geographic special, just something different. The first part of the ride was fine, just dark highway driving. You know, headlights cutting through the black, the road unwinding in front of you. The air was thick, that Louisiana summer humidity even at night, and it smelled like swamp. Earthy, a bit damp, normal for around here. Maybe 10, 15 minutes into the ride, past Ponchatoula proper, I got this urge. You know, gotta pee. Figured I'd hold it till I got closer to Hammond or something, but nope, my bladder had other plans. Highway 51. There is pretty desolate. No houses, no lights, just trees and swamp on both sides. Perfect for a quick stop, really. Pulled over to the side of the road, killed the engine. The bike ticked as it cooled down, and suddenly it was quiet. Real quiet. Quieter than quiet, you know? Like the world just held its breath. Except for the distant drone of the I-55, that low hum in the background, it was like all other sound just vanished. No crickets, no frogs, nothing, just still. Walked a few feet off the shoulder into the trees. Figured that was far enough. Didn't want to be doing my business right on the roadside for anyone driving by. Though who would be out here at this hour anyway? It was pitch black under the trees. Couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Just pure, deep darkness, the kind that feels heavy. Started to, you know, take care of business. And that's when the smell hit me. Christ, the smell. At first I thought, okay, swamp, smells like swamp. You get used to certain smells living down here, but this wasn't just swampy. This was rotten. Like something dead and festering had been baking in the sun for days. Specifically, dead fish. But not just any dead fish, like a whole damn boatload of them rotting for weeks. It was thick, cloying, almost greasy in the air. Made my stomach clench instantly. I wrinkled my nose, trying to breathe through my mouth. Damn, I muttered to myself. Something really stinks around here. Figured maybe a fisherman dumped a bunch of spoiled catch nearby or something. Happens sometimes. Not pleasant, but it's part of living in Louisiana. Then I looked up. I don't know why I looked up. Maybe just instinct. Maybe a feeling like something was watching me. And that's when I saw it. Or them. At first, in the dark, I just thought it was a willow tree. You know, those weeping willows, kind of droopy branches. There was something tall and dark, standing just a little ways into the woods, maybe 15, 20 feet from the road, just past where I was. I thought, didn't realize there were willows this far out here. It was dark and still, just a black shape against the blacker trees behind it. But then, it moved. No wind. I'm telling you, there wasn't a breath of air. The leaves on the trees around me were still. The humidity hung heavy, thick as soup. But this willow, it swayed, not like a tree in the wind. It moved, deliberately, like something was shifting its weight or stretching. My blood went cold, just like that, freezing. That awful fish smell got 100 times worse, felt like it was burning my nostrils. And the silence, that awful, thick silence, it got even heavier. The drone of the interstate seemed to fade further away, like the sound was being swallowed by the darkness around me. I stared, frozen, eyes wide open, trying to pierce the blackness. The willow shifted again, and that's when I saw it wasn't a tree. No trunk, no branches in the way you expect. It was just a dark, massive shape, taller than any tree I'd ever seen, and wider too, like like a wall of darkness had gotten up and started walking. Then it stepped, not with a rustle, not with a crackle of leaves. It stepped like a giant foot coming down on solid ground, heavy, powerful. I felt it more than heard it, a thump that vibrated through the ground right up into my boots, and it started moving towards the road, towards me. I don't know what happened next exactly. My mind kind of went blank for a second there. Just pure, unadulterated terror, primal fear. I know people say that, but you don't know what it means until you feel it. It's like every cell in your body screaming at you to run, to hide, to get away. This thing, it moved across the narrow shoulder of the road. 2 steps, that's all it took. 2 huge, heavy steps, and it was in the road, blocking my bike, blocking me from getting back to the road. And then 2 more steps, and it was on the other side, moving into the deeper swamp on the far side of Highway 51. It was gone in seconds, but those seconds felt like an eternity. As it crossed the road right in front of me, I got a better look at it. Not better, as in clearer, because it was still mostly a silhouette in the gloom. But I could make out shapes. It was tall, yeah, like I said, maybe 10 feet, 12 feet tall at least, and thick, not just tall and skinny, wide. Shoulder to shoulder, I'd guess 4 feet wide, maybe more. Just a massive, solid column of darkness. And then the sound. Right as it stepped into the road, it made a noise. God, I don't even know how to describe it. It was guttural, deep down in its chest, like a rumble mixed with a wet fart. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but that's the closest thing I can think of. A deep, resonant, farty growl. It vibrated in the air, like something huge passing gas in slow motion, but 10 times louder, 10 times nastier. And with it, another wave of that rotten fish smell, even stronger, like it was coming right out of the thing itself. It stank of death and swamp gas and something else, something ancient and unclean. It was suffocating, and the ground shook. I swear to God, the asphalt beneath my feet trembled when it took those steps into and out of the road. It wasn't a big earthquake or anything, but you could feel the weight, the sheer mass of this thing impacting the ground, like a truck hitting a pothole, but multiplied by 10. In that split second, it was in the road, backlit a tiny bit by the faintest moonlight filtering through the swamp trees and the distant car headlights on I-55. I saw something on top, a shape high up on that massive darkness that could have been a head, and something hanging down from it, long and dark, like hair, long, stringy, wet-looking hair, almost dragging on the ground. It was a silhouette, distorted by the darkness and fear twisting my mind, but head and hair on top of this giant, stinking, moving thing. Then it was gone, just swallowed by the darkness on the other side of the road, disappearing into the swamp like it was nothing, like it belonged there, leaving behind only that god-awful smell and the pounding of my heart in my ears. For a moment I stood there, paralyzed, peeing forgotten, everything forgotten except that image, that smell, that sound. My legs were shaking, my hands were trembling, I could feel cold sweat running down my back even in that humid night air. My stomach was churning, ready to throw up. And then, finally, my brain kicked back in. Run! Get out of here! Now! I didn't even bother zipping up. Just turned and ran back to the bike as fast as I could, stumbling over roots and branches in the dark. Felt like I was going to trip and fall any second, like something was going to reach out of the trees and grab me. Got to the bike, fumbled with the key, jammed it in, turned and hit the starter. Thank God, it caught right away. Engine roared to life, a beautiful sound, the only beautiful sound in that whole stinking, terrifying place. Threw my leg over, jammed it into gear, and gunned the throttle. Tires squealed on the asphalt as I took off, didn't even look back. Just rode. Rode like hell was on my tail, rode like my life depended on it, because in that moment, it felt like it did. Didn't stop until I was way past Hammond, until I could see streetlights, until I was back in the land of gas stations and fast food places and normal human noises. Pulled into a brightly lit gas station, still shaking, heart still hammering. Went inside, bought a bottle of water, drank half of it in one go. Just stood there, staring at the soda fridges, trying to breathe, trying to calm down. Took me a long time to get my head straight that night. And honestly, I don't know if it ever really got straight again. Kept looking in my rearview mirror the whole ride home, expecting to see something, anything. Never went back to Highway 51 at night. Not ever. Even during the day, driving past that stretch of road, I get this uneasy feeling, this cold shiver down my spine. I always take the interstate now, even if it's longer, even if it's more traffic. Anything is better than that road, that swamp, that thing. I tried to tell a couple of people about it, close friends. They looked at me like I was crazy, said it was probably just my imagination, or swamp gas playing tricks, or maybe a bear or something. A bear. Yeah, a 10-foot tall, 4-foot wide bear that stinks like dead fish and walks like an earthquake. Sure. So, I stopped talking about it, kept it to myself, buried it deep down. But it's still there, in the back of my mind, a dark, stinking shadow. Sometimes I smell that rotten fish smell even now, for a split second out of nowhere, and it all comes rushing back. I don't know what I saw that night in the Maripaz swamp. I don't have a name for it, no explanation. All I know is it was real. I felt it, I smelled it, I almost saw it, and it scared me more than anything in my life. And honestly, I still can't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it's still out there, in the dark swamp, waiting. And sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, I think I can still hear that low, guttural growl echoing in the silence. Story 6. It was summer of 78, or maybe 79. I'm never too sure with those years. They kind of bleed together in my head. Anyway, it was definitely one of those summers where everything just felt hotter, slower, like the air itself was thick and lazy. My brother Liam and I were spending a week at our friend Mark's place. Mark's family lived on the edge of Fairhaven, Washington, where towns started to get eaten by woods, like real woods, the kind that went on forever and swallowed up the daylight early, even in summer. Mark's house was cool because it had this big wraparound porch. We'd spend most of the afternoon out there just being kids, trading baseball cards, arguing about Star Wars, stuff like that. This particular afternoon, I remember it was sunny, maybe close to noon, because the shadows were sharp and small. We were messing around with some G.I. Joes, setting up a whole battle scene on the porch railing, when we started hearing dogs. Not just one dog, a bunch, and they sounded far off at first, those muffled barks that travel through trees. But they were getting louder, faster. It wasn't friendly barking. It was that frantic, high-pitched yapping that dogs do when they're really worked up, like chasing something or cornering something they hate. Liam and I stopped what we were doing. Mark was inside probably, watching TV or something. He always disappeared into the house whenever he could. The barks were getting seriously loud now, really close. They sounded like they were coming from the direction of the houses across the street and a little down the block, that open grassy area that stretched between the last row of houses and the tree line. We walked to the edge of the porch, leaning over the railing, trying to see what the commotion was. The barking was insane at this point, a whole pack of dogs losing their minds. Then we saw them. First, the dogs. 4, 5, maybe 6 of them. Hard to tell exactly because they were moving so fast, a swirling mass of fur and teeth and snapping jaws. They were tearing across the lawns of the houses opposite us, moving from right to left, towards the woods behind Mark's house. They were all different breeds, mutts mostly. You could see a German Shepherd mix, something smaller and yappy, maybe a terrier, and a couple of bigger, shaggier dogs I didn't recognize. They were running flat out, ears pinned back, all focused on something in front of them. And then we saw what they were chasing. At first, it was just a glimpse, something tall and dark moving fast behind a bush in someone's yard across the street. But then it burst out into the open, onto the neatly mowed lawn. And that's when we saw it clearly. It was... Jesus Christ, I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. It was like a person, but not. Way too tall for one thing. Taller than any person I'd ever seen. Taller than my dad. Taller than any of the grown-ups we knew. I'd guess, looking back now, maybe 8 feet tall, maybe even a bit more, and covered in hair, not like a little bit of hair, like full-on fur head to toe, dark, matted-looking fur. It moved on 2 legs, running upright just like a person would, but wrong. Something was deeply wrong about the way it moved. It was fast, unbelievably fast, faster than any person I'd ever seen run. It was keeping ahead of those dogs easily, even though they were all out for blood. You could see it in the way they were running, the snarls on their faces, the way they were bunching and trying to cut it off. But it just flowed. It moved across the lawns, across the little stretches of road between the houses, like it was gliding. The weirdest thing, besides the height and the hair and everything else, was its arms. They were just hanging there, straight down at its sides, not swinging like arms are supposed to when you run. Just stiff and dangling, almost unnaturally long, reaching down to about its knees. It was skinny too, not bulky and lumbering like you always hear about those Bigfoot things being. This thing was lean, almost gaunt-looking under all that fur, like a stretched-out, hairy skeleton. Liam and I just stood there, frozen on the porch, watching this insane scene play out in front of us. My brain was screaming at me, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? But bears don't run like that, upright, and they sure as hell don't have arms like that. And bears aren't skinny like that. They're all muscle and fat. Was it a monkey? But monkeys are way smaller. And again, the way it moved, it was so wrong for a monkey. The word that popped into my head, and I don't even know why, because I'd only heard it in hushed whispers in those monster magazines my older cousins read. The word that flashed into my mind was Bigfoot. But even then, it didn't fit right. This wasn't some big, clumsy ape-man thing. This was something else. Something wilder somehow, and way, way more terrifying because it looked so much more real. Less like a monster in a movie, and more like something that actually belonged in those woods behind Mark's house, something that had just wandered too close to town. The dogs were still chasing it, yelping and barking like madmen. They were getting closer now to the tree line. I could see the creature was heading straight for the edge of the woods. It was like it knew exactly where it was going, like it had an escape route planned. It was heading right towards the thickest part of the woods, that dark, shadowy place where the trees crowded together so tightly you couldn't see more than a few feet in, even in the middle of the day. They reached the edge of the woods at the same time. The creature didn't slow down, didn't even seem to break stride. It just plunged straight into the trees, disappearing instantly into the darkness under the canopy. The dogs hesitated for a second at the tree line, barking even louder now, their frustration and anger echoing across the yards. They milled around at the edge of the woods for a few moments, still sniffing and yelping, trying to follow the scent. But then, one by one, they started to give up. They trotted back out of the trees, panting, looking confused and defeated. They scattered back towards the houses they'd come from, the barking slowly dying down, fading away until it was just silence. Just like that. 1 minute, chaos, barking, this insane chase happening right in front of us. The next minute, nothing. Silence. Like it had never happened. Like we'd just imagined it. Liam and I stood there, still frozen on the porch, staring at the tree line. The woods just stood there, dark and silent, as if they were swallowing the secret, hiding whatever that thing was deep inside them. The sun was still shining. The birds were chirping. Normal summer day sounds started to creep back into the silence. but everything felt different, tainted. I finally managed to speak, my voice coming out in a shaky whisper. Did you see that?" Liam just nodded, his eyes wide, staring in the same direction as me, still fixed on the dark tree line. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, also in a whisper, What the hell was that, Ethan?" I didn't know. I still don't know. I shook my head, feeling this cold shiver run down my spine, even though it was a hot day. I don't know. I really don't know. We stayed out there on the porch for a long time after that, just watching the woods, waiting for... I don't know what we were waiting for. Maybe for it to come back. Maybe for the dogs to start barking again. Maybe just for something to break the silence, to tell us that what we'd seen had actually been real. Mark finally came out of the house then, blinking in the sunlight, looking confused. "What are you guys doing? You've been out here forever. You missed Scooby-Doo." We didn't say anything for a minute. Then Liam said, "Mark, did you hear all that barking?" Mark shrugged. "Yeah, the dogs. They're always barking around here. What's the big deal?" "No, but it was really loud," I said, trying to find the words to explain, knowing even as I said them that they'd sound insane. And they were chasing something. We saw it, Mark." Mark looked at us like we were nuts. "Saw what? A squirrel? A rabbit?" "No," Liam said, his voice still hushed. It was like a man, but hairy, really tall, and it was running from the dogs. It went into the woods." Mark just stared at us, then he started to laugh. "A hairy man? Come on, guys. Seriously? You're messing with me, right?" We tried to explain, tried to describe what we'd seen. The height, the fur, the way it ran, the stiff arms, everything. But the more we talked, the more ridiculous it sounded, even to ourselves. Mark just kept laughing, shaking his head, calling us crazy. He said we'd been out in the sun too long, that we'd imagined it, and maybe we had. That thought started to creep into my own head then. Maybe it was just the heat, playing tricks on our eyes. Maybe it was a shadow, a weird shape in the trees, that our kid brains had turned into something else. But I knew deep down that wasn't true. I knew what I'd seen. Liam knew too. I could see it in his face. We'd both seen it, whatever it was. We didn't talk about it much after that. Not to Mark, he'd just make fun of us. Not to our parents, they'd never believe us. They'd probably think we were having nightmares. We just kept it to ourselves. It became this secret thing between me and Liam, something we never really talked about directly. But we both knew it was there, lurking in the back of our minds. We went back home at the end of the week. Summer went on, school started again. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it ever is. But that image, that flash of dark fur and long, stiff arms, that stayed with me. Especially whenever I was near woods, any woods, it would come back, that feeling of unease, of something watching from the shadows. Over the years, I've tried to make sense of it, tried to find some rational explanation. Maybe it was some kind of weird dog. But no dog moves like that or looks like that. Maybe it was a person in a suit, but who would be running around in a fur suit in the middle of the day, being chased by a pack of dogs? And why? And it moved way too fast, way too naturally for someone in a bulky suit. I've read books, seen documentaries about, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes, when I see those blurry photos, those shaky videos, I think, maybe that's what it was. But the descriptions never really match up to what I saw. They always talk about these big, hulking, ape-like creatures. What I saw was different, sleeker, faster, almost predatory. More like a wild animal, less like some kind of missing link. And the fear, that's what I can't forget. Not just the surprise, the shock of seeing something so bizarre, but a deep, cold, primal fear that went right down to my bones. A feeling that we'd seen something we weren't supposed to see, something that existed just outside the edges of our safe, normal world. I still live in Washington, not too far from Fairhaven. I go hiking sometimes, in the forests around here, and every time I'm out there, surrounded by trees, I can't help but think about that day. I always find myself glancing at the shadows, listening to the sounds of the woods, wondering if maybe it's still out there, somewhere, hidden in the trees, just watching, waiting. And you know what the really messed up thing is? To this day, Liam and I have never talked about it again. Not really. We've never sat down and properly discussed what we saw that day on Mark's porch. It's like we both decided to just bury it, to pretend it never happened. Maybe we're both too scared to open that door again, to confront the fact that we both witnessed something that just doesn't make any sense. Something that changed the way we looked at the woods, and maybe even the world, forever. And that's it. That's my story. I know it sounds crazy. I probably wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it. But I did. We both did. And I'll never forget it. Story 7. So, deer season rolls around, and we're itching to go. We knew this spot way up the North Nooksack River, real remote. My dad knew someone who logged up there years ago and told him it was crawling with deer, and hardly anyone ever went that far in because it's a pain to get to and back. Perfect for us. Plus, there were always stories about those woods. You know, whispered things people said around campfires about weird noises and stuff way out there in the deep parts of the forest. We were kids, so that kind of thing just made it sound even cooler, even if we acted like we didn't believe it. We planned the trip for a Saturday. School was out, and the weather forecast said snow, but nothing too crazy. Famous last words, right? We packed the truck Friday night, rifles cleaned and ready, camping gear in. Enough food for a couple of days. Mom made us her usual breakfast burritos to take with us. Those things could survive a nuclear blast. They're so packed. We left before sunrise the next day. It was already spitting snow a little when we left town, but nothing major. By the time we got to the logging road that we had to take off the main highway, the flakes were getting bigger. Liam was driving, he just got his license, and he was all proud to be behind the wheel. I was shotgun, messing with the radio, trying to find some decent music past the static. The logging road was rough, really rough. Rocks, ruts, mud. We were bouncing all over the place, the truck sliding a bit on the packed snow. Trees were getting thicker, taller, closing in on the road. It got that quiet, you know, the kind of quiet where the snow just sucks up all the sound. The flakes were coming down thick now, those big wet ones that just pile up fast. I looked at Liam, and he was grinning, loving it, the adventure of it all. I was too, to be honest. This felt like the real deal, like we were getting way out there, away from everything. We parked the truck at this old overgrown clearing near the river. The snow was already a good few inches deep there, and still coming down hard. We got out, unloaded our gear, and started getting ready. It was cold, biting cold, even though we were layered up. The air smelled sharp, like pine and clean snow, and something else, something earthy and wild. We started walking, following the riverbank at first, then veering into the woods. We were looking for deer tracks, for any sign. The snow was perfect for tracking, fresh and soft. Every sound was muffled by the snow. It felt heavy, that silence, like it was pressing down on you. Liam and I weren't talking much, just walking, looking, listening. We pushed deeper into the pines. The trees were so dense there, the snow on the ground was actually less, like the canopy blocked a lot of it. It was darker in there too, even though it was still morning, maybe mid-morning. The air felt different, colder, almost damp. Then we came to this little clearing. It wasn't much, just a small open patch surrounded by those huge pines. And that's when we saw them. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. Just dents in the snow, big ones. But then I got closer. Footprints, giant footprints, humanoid. That's the only way to describe them, like bare human feet, but huge. I mean ridiculously huge. I stopped dead. Liam bumped into me from behind. "What is it?" he whispered. I pointed. "Look." He followed my finger, then his eyes went wide. He just stared. No talking for a second. We were both just frozen there, looking at these things in the snow. They were massive. I'm telling you, like 40 centimeters long easy, maybe more, and deep, sunk way down into the snow, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. They were spaced apart too, long strides, like whatever was walking had legs for days. And the detail, that's what got me. You could see every toe, the arch of the foot, the heel, clear as day, like someone had pressed a giant foot down into wet cement, and then it froze. I went closer, knelt down. No snow inside the prints, nothing, which meant they were fresh, really fresh, like whatever made them had been there just before we were. That's when a little prickle went up my spine. "What the hell?" Liam breathed out finally. I stood up, slowly. I felt weird, confused mostly, and a little uneasy. Deer tracks are one thing. Coyote tracks, sure. Even bear tracks. We know what those look like. But this was something else entirely. We didn't have cell phones back then, not like now. No cameras on them anyway. It was just us out there and these giant footprints in the snow. It was like something out of a movie, some crazy story. But here it was, right in front of us. Liam was walking around them now, circling them. "Look at the size of these things, Ethan. What could make tracks like this?" I shook my head. "I don't know, man. I really don't know." Part of me, a little kid part of me maybe, wanted to think Bigfoot. You hear stories even around here out in the woods. But Bigfoot? Really? That's just stories, right? Made up stuff. But these tracks, these were real. Liam pointed in the direction the tracks were going. "They're heading that way, deeper into the woods." He was already moving, stepping carefully around the prints, looking in the direction they were going. He was always the braver one, the one who jumped first, asked questions later. Me? I'm more cautious, think things through a bit more. "Liam, hold on," I said. "Where are you going?" "Following them," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Come on, we gotta see what made these." He started walking, his rifle slung over his shoulder, moving into the trees. I hesitated. Something felt wrong, really wrong. But curiosity, it gets you, doesn't it? Especially when you're young and stupid and think you're invincible. I took a breath and followed him. "Liam, wait up." We started tracking these things. They were easy to follow in the fresh snow, heading deeper and deeper into the woods, away from the river, away from anything that felt familiar. The trees got even denser, if that was possible. The pines were packed together, blocking out more and more of the already grey light. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole. The tracks led us through some real thick stuff. Thorny bushes, tangled branches, fallen logs covered in snow. We had to push our way through, our clothes getting snagged and wet from the snow. The silence got even heavier somehow. It was like the woods were holding their breath. We followed those tracks for maybe, I don't know, 20 minutes, maybe more. Maybe it was only 10, but it felt longer. Time felt different out there. The light was definitely fading now. The heavy snow clouds were making it darker, earlier than it should have been. It was starting to feel like dusk was coming on fast. And that feeling, that uneasy feeling I had in the clearing, it was getting stronger, much stronger. It was more than just unease now. It was fear, real, cold fear creeping up my back. I kept looking around behind us into the trees. Every shadow seemed to move. Every snap of a branch in the wind made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Liam was still ahead of me, focused on the tracks. He was excited, I could tell. He was caught up in the mystery, the adventure of it all. But me, I wasn't feeling the adventure anymore. I was just feeling scared. "Liam," I said again, my voice coming out too quiet. "Liam, maybe we should turn back." He stopped, turned around, surprised. "What? Why? We're almost there." "Almost where?" I asked. "We don't even know where we're going, and it's getting dark, Liam, really dark." He looked around then, finally seeming to notice how much the light had faded. He looked back at the tracks, stretching ahead into the deepening gloom of the forest. For the first time, I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "But we're so close," he mumbled, still looking at the tracks. "Close to what?" I said, my voice getting sharper now, my fear pushing out the politeness. "Close to getting lost. Close to something. I don't know, Liam, but something feels wrong here, really wrong." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and he saw it in my face. He saw the fear. He knew I wasn't just being cautious, I was genuinely scared. He sighed, the excitement draining out of him. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, yeah, you're right. We should head back." Relief washed over me, so strong it almost made my knees weak. "Thank God," I breathed. We turned around, started retracing our steps, following our own tracks back. But even our own tracks looked different now, in the fading light. Everything looked different, more menacing. The trees seemed to loom over us, like they were watching us go. The silence was worse going back. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded amplified, distorted by the heavy quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see, I don't even know what. Something big. Liam was quiet too now. The bravado was gone. He was walking fast, almost jogging. I could tell he was feeling it now, the same fear I was feeling. We walked in silence for what felt like forever. Every shadow seemed to shift, to take shape. My imagination was running wild, filling the darkness with things, unseen things. We finally made it back to the clearing where we'd found the tracks. It looked different now too, colder, darker. Even the giant footprints in the snow looked different somehow, more ominous. We didn't stop. We kept walking, faster now, pushing through the trees, heading back towards the river, towards the clearing where we parked the truck. It felt like an eternity, but we finally broke through the trees and saw the edge of the clearing, the faint outline of the truck in the snow-dimmed light. I almost cried with relief. We practically ran the last bit, stumbling through the snow, scrambling into the truck. Liam fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He got the engine started, and the sound of it, loud and rough, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. We didn't say a word as he put the truck in gear and pulled out of the clearing, back onto the logging road. We just sat there, breathing hard, staring straight ahead. We didn't turn on the radio. We didn't talk. We just drove. We drove back down that rough logging road, every bump and slide, feeling like we were escaping something. We didn't relax until we hit the paved highway, back in familiar territory, back where there were houses and lights, back in the real world. Even then, the silence in the truck was heavy. Neither of us wanted to talk about it. Not really. We got home late, hours later than we told Mom we'd be back. She was worried sick, of course. We just mumbled something about getting turned around, the snow getting bad, nothing about the tracks. We didn't want to tell anyone about the tracks. Not then, not ever really. Later, much later that night, when everyone else was asleep, Liam came into my room. He just stood there for a second in the doorway, in the dark. "Ethan," he whispered. "Yeah?" I whispered back. "Those tracks," he said, his voice barely audible. "Those weren't deer tracks, were they?" I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just stared into the darkness. "No," I finally said. "No, Liam. They definitely weren't deer tracks." He didn't say anything else. He just nodded, slowly, then turned around and went back to his room. And that was it. We never talked about it again. Not really. We went back hunting up there a few times, to other spots. Never back to that exact place. We never saw anything like those tracks again. Life went on. But sometimes, when it snows really hard, like that day, and the world gets all muffled and quiet, I think about those woods. I think about those tracks. And I wonder, what the hell made them? And what would have happened if we'd kept following them? I still don't know. And honestly, part of me doesn't want to know. Some questions are better left unanswered, you know? Some things you just leave out there in the woods, in the snow, and try not to think about too much. But you never really forget, never. Story 8. Okay, so this happened back in '06. I don't usually talk about this, not really, except maybe with a couple of my buddies from back in the Corps, guys who've seen some shit, you know? But seeing some of the stuff online lately, figured maybe I'd just throw this out there. Not looking for anything, just telling it. It was early October in the Cascades, eastern side of Oregon. Place is beautiful, rugged as hell, perfect for hunting. I was after deer. Had a good spot marked out a few miles off one of those Forest Service roads, maybe 4 miles, maybe a little more. Packed in with my gear, tent, the works. Enough for a few days out there. I'd spent the first couple days scouting, hiking around, getting a feel for the area. Spotted a buck, nice 8-pointer, exactly the kind of trophy I was looking for. He was hanging around a clearing near a small valley, seemed to bed down in the thicker woods just off it. Figured I'd get myself in position before dawn on day 3 and wait him out. So, morning comes, still dark, maybe an hour or so before sunrise. Got myself up, made some coffee, packed a quick breakfast, and started heading towards where I wanted to set up. My spot was overlooking this field from a slightly higher ridge, good visibility, clear shooting lane if he came out. I got myself situated, leaned up against a big pine, rifle resting across my knees, just waiting for the light to come up. Quiet as anything out there, just the normal woods noises, the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional bird starting to chirp, that sort of thing. Then I heard it. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it was definitely there. A rustling, like something moving through the underbrush, but heavier than a deer, heavier than any deer I'd ever heard. It was coming from my left, in the woods, up the slope heading towards the little valley and then the open fields. My first thought naturally was deer. Maybe it was my buck coming out earlier than I expected. Heart rate picked up a little, adrenaline starting to tickle, that hunting feeling, you know? I eased my rifle up, safety off, got my eye lined up with the scope, pointed it towards the sound. Started scanning the edge of the woods where the field met the trees, waiting for something to step out. The rustling kept coming, getting closer. It was moving uphill deliberately, not crashing around like a bear, more purposeful. But as it got closer to the edge of the trees, the way it was moving, it didn't look right for a deer. Too upright, too tall. It was moving like something walking on 2 legs. Now, instantly, my brain's trying to catch up. Hunter. Maybe another hunter decided to come in from that side? Irritation flared up. This was my spot. I'd been here for days. Didn't see any other rigs down on the main road when I hiked in, but who knows? Someone could have walked in from somewhere else. The rustling got louder, closer, right at the tree line now, and then it stepped out. Or, well, not stepped exactly, more like emerged. And I saw it. Or part of it. It was big, Christ, it was huge. I'm talking broad shoulders, and it was tall, way taller than any man. It was partly hidden by some thick bushes right at the edge of the clearing, but even through the leaves and branches, the size of it was overwhelming. Honestly, at first, I was just pissed. This dude, whoever he was screwing up my hunt. I slowly stood up, kept my rifle loosely in my hand, pointed downwards. Figured I'd wave him off, let him know this was my area. I whistled, a sharp, loud whistle, and waved my other hand in a get-out-of-here motion. Trying to be clear, but not confrontational, you know. Just letting him know I was there, and he was messing with my hunt. And that's when it reacted. Abruptly, like I'd startled it, but also like it didn't like being told what to do. It turned towards me, fast. And that's when I saw it full on, or at least as full on as I could in the pre-dawn gloom. Even then, the sheer size of it hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't a man, it was massive, just colossal. Shoulders that were wider than any linebacker I'd ever seen, even on TV. It was standing upright, clearly on two legs, and it towered. I'm 6'1", and this thing standing maybe 30, 40 yards away made me feel like a kid. Like insignificant. The way it stood, it was imposing. Even in the dim light I could see it was covered in something dark, like thick fur. Dark fur and just muscle. Bulk. Our eyes met, or I think they did. It was still pretty dark. The sun hadn't even peeked over the horizon yet, but there was enough light filtering through the trees, and whatever it was looking right at me. I could feel it. That locked gaze, that intensity. Then, just as suddenly as it turned, it dropped down, lowered itself fast, and disappeared back behind those bushes like it was trying to hide, just gone, vanished back into the undergrowth. For a second, maybe two, I just stood there, frozen. Brain was scrambling. Hunter? No way. No man could be that big, that different. My irritation was gone, replaced by confusion. A deep, unsettling confusion. I lowered my rifle, held it loosely again, started taking a few steps forward, into the field, trying to get a better look at where it had gone. Maybe it was still there, behind the bushes. Maybe if I moved out into the open, showed myself more clearly, whatever it was, Hunter or something else, would realize I wasn't a threat and just leave. That's when it stood up again, rose up from behind those bushes, and this time there was no mistaking it. No more shadows, no more partial views. It was right there, in the clearing, maybe 30 yards away. And it wasn't hiding anymore. This time it was completely out in the open, standing tall. And the dawn was just starting to break, giving enough light to really see it. And what I saw, it was like something ripped out of a nightmare. Massive, covered head to toe in thick, dark brown hair. It wasn't just fur, it was like a pelt, shaggy, matted looking. It moved, and the muscles underneath that hair. Christ. It was all muscle and bone, like carved out of granite. And it made a sound, a low growl rumbling up from its chest, deep and guttural. It shook the air around it, vibrated in my chest. The bushes around it rustled and shook as it shifted its weight, like it was coiled, ready to... I don't even know. Ready for something. My heart was hammering now. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of combat, not the adrenaline rush of a firefight. This was primal. Deep down in my gut, instinct telling me I was way out of my depth. I raised my binoculars, needed to see, needed to understand what the hell I was looking at. Shaky hands brought them up, focused them on its face. The face, that's what really got me. Wide, broad forehead, sloping back, heavy brow ridge. Nose was flat, almost like it was pushed in. Thick lips, almost protruding. The whole face, except for the fleshy parts around the nose and mouth, was covered in that same dark hair. But the skin itself, where I could see it, was dark, almost grayish, leathery looking. And the eyes, dark, deep set and intense, focused right on me. There was no mistaking the intelligence in those eyes, no mistaking the hostility. It was looking at me like I was something it didn't like, something it didn't want there. It wasn't human, it wasn't an ape, not like anything I'd ever seen pictures of or on TV. It was something else, something I had no name for, something ancient and powerful and unknown. Panic started to creep in, real cold panic. My training, all those years of Marine Corps discipline, was fighting against it, telling me to stay calm, to assess, to react. But underneath it all, pure raw terror was clawing its way up. I took a step back instinctively, dropped my binoculars, fumbled for my rifle, brought it up, aimed it right at its face. The crosshairs settled on that broad, hairy forehead. My finger tightened on the trigger. I could have shot. Easy shot. Right there, center mass. I'm a trained marksman. I could have put it down, but I didn't. Something stopped me. a feeling, an instinct, deep in my gut, that screaming, "Don't do it." That this wasn't like shooting a deer, that this wasn't even like anything human, that shooting it would be a mistake. A huge, fatal mistake. Like I would be crossing a line, like I'd be unleashing something I couldn't control, like I'd be starting something I couldn't finish. It just stared at me. No change in its expression, just those dark eyes fixed on mine, that low growl still rumbling in its chest. It wasn't charging, wasn't moving towards me, but the hostility, the threat, it was palpable. You could cut it with a knife. I slowly, deliberately lowered the rifle slightly, kept it pointed towards it, but not directly at its head. And then I raised my other hand, empty, palm open, towards it, a peace offering, a sign of submission. I don't know what it was, just instinct, something telling me to back down. I kept my eyes locked on it, never breaking contact. Slowly, inch by inch, I started to back away, moved backwards towards where I'd come from, back into the woods, towards my camp, still facing it, still holding that peace sign, rifle in my other hand, loose but ready. It watched me, didn't move, just stood there, massive and dark against the slowly brightening sky, watching me retreat. It felt like forever, those steps backwards, like every muscle in my body was screaming to run, to turn and bolt, but I forced myself to keep it slow, deliberate, controlled. When I got back to the tree line, I didn't turn my back. I just kept backing up, keeping the creature in sight, reached behind me without looking, and found my backpack where I'd dropped it, slipped it onto my shoulders, still backing away. Finally, when I was deeper in the woods, shielded by thicker trees, I turned and I ran. Didn't stop running until I got back to my camp. Didn't even think about breakfast, about deer, about anything. Just tore down my tent, threw everything into my pack, not even bothering to fold things properly, just stuffing them in. Packed up in record time, like I was bugging out from a firefight. Hiked back to the Forest Service road, fast as I could, adrenaline pumping. Got to my truck, threw my gear in the back, and got the hell out of there. Didn't look back, didn't stop until I was miles away, back on the highway, heading towards the nearest town. Drove straight to a motel, checked in, and just sat there, shaking, still seeing that face in my head, that size, that presence. Next day, I drove even further away, found another hunting spot hundreds of miles from there. Went hunting, killed a deer, did everything normal, but it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same after that. I haven't been back to the Cascades since, and I don't think I ever will. I still go hunting, but I stick to areas closer to people, closer to roads, closer to civilization. Just feels safer that way. I never told anyone about it, not really, not in detail. Too crazy, right? Sounds like something out of a movie. Who would believe it? Even my buddies from the Corps, they'd think I was losing it. But I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and I know to this day that whatever that thing was, out there in the woods, it was something real, something ancient, something we don't understand, and something I was lucky to walk away from. And the craziest part, the part that still gets to me, that keeps me up at night sometimes, is the feeling, the absolute certainty that if I'd pulled that trigger, if I'd fired that shot, things would have gone very, very differently, and not in a way I would have liked. It's like I just knew. It wasn't fear that stopped me shooting. It was instinct, survival instinct, telling me clear as day to back down, to submit, to just walk away. And I'm damn glad I listened, because whatever that thing was, I don't think it was meant to be messed with, and I still have no idea what it was. None. Story 9. It was out in the sticks, deep, rural, proper backwoods kind of place. Early 90s, think dial-up internet was just becoming a thing, but out where we were lucky to get decent radio reception. Me and my buddies, we were always messing around in the woods, building forts, trails, you name it. This time it was a cabin. We found this spot, deeper into the woods than we usually went, on Old Man Hemlock's property. He was the neighbor of Mark, one of my friends. Mark's dad said it was okay, just be respectful and don't burn down his woods. We were like 13, 14 years old, something like that, full of piss and vinegar, and thought we were invincible. This cabin wasn't fancy, not even close. Just logs we dragged and notched together, filling the gaps with mud and moss, whatever we could find. It was more of a shelter than a house, really. We were nowhere near finishing it, but it was far enough along to be our hangout. A place to feel like we were in charge, away from parents and rules and all that stuff. We had even rigged up some old beat-up cots and bunk beds we'd scrounged from somewhere, probably Mark's garage. Total dive, but it was our dive. So this one weekend, it must have been late fall, because it was getting cold at night, we decided to have a proper cabin night. 5 of us. Me, my brother Mark, Dave, and Chris. We packed sleeping bags, some junk food, chips, soda, candy, a deck of cards, and a couple of those cheap flashlights that barely worked. Oh, and Mark's older brother was kinda lax with his hunting rifle. Mark had swiped it without ammo, just for show. Teenage bravado, you know? Felt safer with it, even unloaded. We hiked in around dusk, built a small fire outside for a bit, just talking smack and telling dumb stories. Then the cold really set in, and we piled into the cabin. It was cramped with all 5 of us, plus our gear, but cozy in a weird way. We played cards for hours, ate all the junk food way too fast, and just generally acted like idiots, laughing at everything and nothing. Around 1 a.m., maybe a bit later, we were all starting to get tired. We'd spread out in the cots and bunk beds. My brother and I took the bunk on the northeast wall, the one closest to the deepest part of the woods. It was properly dark by then, no moon, just pure black outside. We were just drifting off to sleep when we heard it. Thump, thump, thump. A solid, rhythmic thumping. At first it was faint, like something far off. We all kind of froze, listening. Thump, 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 thump. It got louder, closer. It was like a heartbeat, but heavy, like something big hitting wood. Then we realized it was the wall, the northeast wall right behind our bunk beds. What the hell is that? Dave whispered from his cot in the corner. Dunno, Mark said, his voice a bit shaky. Probably just an animal or something. Thump, thump, thump. It kept going, steady and strong, like someone was taking an axe to the cabin wall. But there wasn't any chopping sound, just the solid thump of impact. Hey, who's out there? Chris yelled, trying to sound tough, but you could hear the nervousness in his voice. No answer, just thump, thump, thump. We all got up, grabbing the flashlights. Mark picked up the rifle, swinging it around like he knew what he was doing, even though we all knew he had no clue. We shone the weak flashlight beams towards the wall. Nothing, just logs and darkness beyond. Maybe it's just a tree branch hitting the cabin in the wind, I said, trying to sound reasonable, even though there wasn't any wind that night. Dead calm. Branches don't thump like that, my brother muttered, his eyes wide. He was always the more sensible one, didn't scare easily. But I could tell even he was starting to get freaked out. We yelled again, louder this time, all of us shouting at once. Hey, get lost! We got guns! Yeah, unloaded gun, but whatever. Still sounded tough, at least to us. But the thumping didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Thump, 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 ignoring us completely. That's when the fear started to really sink in. It wasn't just some dumb prank. This felt deliberate, heavy, menacing. Okay, whoever's doing this, cut it out, Mark shouted, raising the rifle like he was about to aim it. We're warning you, we will shoot. Bluffing, big time, but hoping whoever was out there didn't know that. Still no response, just the relentless thump, thump, thump. My brother, usually the calm one, was starting to lose it. All right, that's it, he hissed, anger and fear mixing in his voice. 1, 2, 3. And before anyone could say anything, he squeezed off a shot. Well, shot is generous. He pointed the rifle roughly towards the wall, stuck the barrel as close to a gap between the logs as he could, and pulled the trigger. Just click. Of course. No ammo. We were idiots. We stared at him. He was bright red in the face. "Right, okay, new plan," he stammered, trying to cover his embarrassment. "Flashlights." We all focused our beams on the wall again, our hearts pounding in our chests. For a second, nothing, just the weak circles of light in the dark woods, the rough texture of the logs. Then, silence. The thumping had stopped. Complete and utter silence. Even the usual night sounds of the woods seemed to have gone quiet. Just us, breathing hard, flashlights shaking in our hands, staring at the wall, waiting. Minutes stretched out, feeling like hours. The silence was almost worse than the thumping. It was thick, heavy, like something was holding its breath too. Maybe it's gone," Dave whispered, his voice trembling. "Don't jinx it, man," Chris muttered back. We stood there for what felt like forever, not moving, barely breathing, hoping it was over, hoping whatever it was had just left. Stupid, childish hope. Then it started again. Thump. But this time it wasn't the same. It was louder, deeper, more aggressive. Thump. Thump. Faster now, and hitting harder, shaking the whole cabin. The logs groaned and creaked. Thump. 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 It was like whatever was out there was pissed off now. Angrier, and definitely not backing down. "Shoot again!" Mark yelled, panicking now. He shoved the rifle at my brother. "Do something!" My brother grabbed the rifle back, his face pale but determined. He jammed the barrel into the gap again and pulled the trigger again and again. Click, click, click. Still nothing, obviously. But we kept yelling and shining the flashlights, trying to make noise, hoping to scare it away somehow. But the thumping just kept getting louder, faster, more violent. Thump, 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 thump. It was a furious barrage now, shaking the cabin so hard we thought it would collapse. The air vibrated with each hit. We were huddled together, backs against the opposite wall, flashlights waving wildly, yelling, shouting, our voices cracking with fear, complete and utter panic. Then, just as suddenly as it started the first time, it stopped. Silence. Again. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't just silence. It was like listening, like something was listening to us. We held our breath, straining our ears. Then we heard it, footsteps, heavy footsteps, walking, outside, not running, not crashing through the woods, just walking, slow, deliberate, heavy steps, like something huge and really, really heavy. Moving along the north wall, the same wall it had been pounding on, walking slowly, steadily. The footsteps went past the northeast corner, then along the north wall. We followed the sound with our flashlights as best we could, shining them through the gaps between the logs, watching shadows move outside. Whatever it was big. The shadows were massive, hulking, and it was moving slowly, methodically, like it knew exactly where it was going. The footsteps reached the northwest corner of the cabin, then paused, just for a second. We all held our breath, hearts hammering in our chests so loud we thought it could hear them. Then the footsteps started again, turning the corner, moving along the west wall now, still slow, still heavy, still coming closer to something. We realized with a fresh wave of terror that it was heading for the door. The door was on the south wall, and the footsteps were coming right for it. The door wasn't much, just rough planks of wood we'd nailed together with big gaps between them. A flimsy latch was the only lock. Above the door, there was a gap, maybe 8 inches, 20 centimeters high, where the logs didn't quite meet. An opening all the way across the top of the door frame. We'd meant to fill it in, never got around to it. Stupid us. The footsteps were getting closer to the door. We huddled tighter together, backing away from the south wall, pointing all the flashlights at the door, waiting, terrified. Then they stopped right outside the door, right there. We could feel its presence. Massive. Right on the other side of the flimsy wooden door, the cabin was suddenly filled with this weight, a heavy, suffocating presence. And then it moved again, but not walking. This time it was bending or lowering itself. We could hear rustling outside the door, branches snapping, leaves crunching, like something huge was crouching down, lowering its head. And then, through the gap above the door, the space we were too lazy to fill in, something appeared. It wasn't human, not even close. It was a face, but like nothing I'd ever seen or even imagined. Distorted, twisted, bestial. It was pale, greyish-white, like something dead or not quite alive. The skin was stretched tight, weirdly smooth, like plastic almost. And the eyes, God, the eyes. They were huge, black, and completely empty. No pupils, no whites, just black holes, staring right at us, through the gap above the door. This thing, crouched down, face level with the gap, just looking, staring into the cabin, at us. It wasn't just the way it looked, it was the wrongness of it. Everything about it was unnatural, disturbing, like something that shouldn't exist, something broken, something evil. The air went cold, freezing, like all the heat had been sucked out of the cabin. We just stared back, paralyzed, frozen in terror, completely and utterly helpless. Then my brother screamed, a raw animal scream of pure terror, and it broke the spell. It snapped us out of it. All at once we reacted, pure instinct, panic. We lunged forward, pointing the flashlights wildly, screaming, shouting, throwing anything we could grab. Mark, still clutching the unloaded rifle like a lifeline, swung it at the door, hitting the wood with a pathetic thump. Then something clicked in my brother's eyes, something desperate. He grabbed my flashlight out of my hand, and he threw it. He hurled it with all his might, straight at the face in the gap above the door. The flashlight hit with a sickening thwack, and the face recoiled. It jerked back, vanishing from the gap in an instant. There was a low, guttural sound from outside, a growl or a grunt, deep and monstrous. And then another sound, the unmistakable sound of movement, but not footsteps this time, more like rustling, crashing through the undergrowth, moving away from the cabin, fast, fading into the darkness. We stood there, panting, shaking, hearts still pounding like crazy, staring at the empty gap above the door, where that face had been. For what felt like another eternity, we just stood there, frozen. Then slowly it started to sink in. It was gone. Whatever it was gone. We had survived, somehow. But the terror didn't go away. It just changed. It turned into this cold, gnawing fear deep in our guts, a fear that wouldn't let go. We gotta get out of here, Dave stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Chris breathed, nodding, his face white as a sheet. Right now. We knew we couldn't stay, not another second, but we were miles from anywhere, deep in the woods. We had no way to call for help, no cars, nothing, just Mark's quad bike, parked outside the cabin around the back. It was a small, single-seater thing, not nearly enough for all of us. The quad, I said, pointing towards the back of the cabin. Mark's quad. Only one, Mark said, his voice still shaky. Not gonna fit all of us. We looked at each other, panicked, stuck. Then my brother stepped forward. Me and Lucas will go, he said firmly. We'll take the quad. Go get help. You guys stay here. Stay quiet. Lock the door. We'll be back as fast as we can. Are you crazy? Chris yelled. Leave us here, alone with that thing out there. It's the only way, my brother insisted. It's faster than all of us walking, and someone needs to get help. We'll go to Old Man Hemlock's place. He's got a phone. He'll come back with us. It was insane, but it was the only plan we had, and staying in that cabin, that was definitely not an option. We crept towards the door, terrified of what might be outside. Mark carefully unlatched the door, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped the latch. He slowly pushed the door open, just a crack at first, then wider. We pointed all our flashlights out into the darkness, sweeping the beams around. Nothing, just trees and shadows. The woods were silent again, eerily silent. We hesitated for a moment, then bolted. We scrambled out of the cabin, running hunched over, heading for the back where Mark's quad was parked. We didn't stop to look around, didn't say a word, just ran. We got to the quad. My brother jumped on, started it up. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence. Too loud, way too loud. We all froze, listening. Nothing. Still silence except for the quad's engine. "Go! Go!" Mark shouted, pushing my brother forward. My brother revved the engine, grabbed my arm, pulled me onto the back of the quad. It was tiny, barely enough room for one, let alone two, but we crammed ourselves on, clinging to each other, desperate to get away. "We'll be back!" my brother yelled to the others, and then he gunned the engine. The quad lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, and we tore off into the woods. We bounced and jolted over the rough ground, branches whipping at our faces, the engine screaming in our ears. We didn't look back, just kept going, as fast as that little quad could go. Every rustle in the woods, every shadow made us jump. We were terrified it was going to come after us, chase us down. We finally burst out of the woods and onto the dirt track that led to Hemlock's farm. We didn't stop until we were pounding on Hemlock's front door, yelling, babbling, trying to explain what had happened. Old Man Hemlock was, well, he was an old man from the backwoods, seen a lot. He didn't panic. He listened to our frantic story, his face grim. He grabbed his own rifle, a proper hunting rifle this time, loaded, and he told us to get in his truck. We drove back to the edge of the woods, headlights cutting through the darkness. Hemlock was calm, but you could see in his eyes he was taking it seriously. He parked the truck, grabbed his rifle, and told us to stay close behind him. We walked back into the woods, towards the cabin, Hemlock leading the way, rifle ready. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound made us jump. The air felt heavy, oppressive, even outside the cabin. We got to the cabin. It was silent, dark, ominous. Hemlock cautiously pushed open the door, rifle raised. We crowded behind him, peering into the cabin. Empty. Just the mess we'd left behind. Sleeping bags, cards, empty chip bags, scattered flashlights. No sign of anything. No blood, no tracks, nothing broken except the door, splintered and cracked from where we'd shot at it. Our friends were gone. Mark, Dave, and Chris. Just gone. We searched the cabin, searched around it, called out their names, our voices echoing in the silent woods. Nothing. No answer. No sign of them. Just emptiness, like they had vanished into thin air. Hemlock was shaking his head, muttering something under his breath. He told us to get back to the truck. He wasn't going to search any further in the dark. He said we'd come back in the morning with more people, more light. But we never did. We never went back to that cabin. Not properly, not into those woods. We told our parents some half-baked story about getting scared by animals and deciding to hike out early. They didn't believe us, but they didn't push it either. Maybe they could see something in our eyes. Maybe they could sense something was wrong. We never told anyone the full story. Not really. Who would believe us? A monster in the woods? A face at the door? Sound like a bad horror movie. But I know what I saw. We all saw it. That face, that thing. And we heard it. Felt it. That terror. It was real. More real than anything else in my life. To this day, I still have nightmares about it. About the thumping, the footsteps, the silence, and that face. Those black, empty eyes staring at me from the darkness. I don't know what it was. I don't know what happened to Mark, Dave, and Chris. They were just gone, vanished like they'd been taken. Sometimes late at night when it's really quiet, I swear I can still hear it, faintly in the distance. Thump, thump, thump. And I know deep down that it's still out there, somewhere in the woods, waiting. Story 10. So, Background. Mateo and I go way back, Marines together. Seen some real shit in our time, you know? After we got out, we tried to keep that bond going. Hunting trips are kind of our thing. I've hunted since I was a kid. Mateo, he's from Florida, never really done big game before. I promised him an elk hunt in Idaho, figured it would be a good way to get away from everything, you know, just us and the mountains. I picked this spot in southeast Idaho, way back in the mountains, pretty remote. We drove for hours, then switched to horses. It's rugged country, man, steep trails, thick woods. Exactly what I was looking for. We packed in with our horses and a mule for the gear, probably hiked about 20 miles in from the nearest road. Took us all day just to get to where I wanted to set up camp. First night, even before anything happened, there was this feeling, you know, just off. We got the camp set up, fire going, horses picketed, mule tied to a tree, normal stuff. But the horses were jittery as hell, pawing the ground, snorting, eyes wide. They were seasoned mountain horses, not exactly city slickers, so that was weird right off the bat. I figured it was just the new environment, new smells, maybe a mountain lion in the area. Tried to play it down for Mateo. He was already a bit on edge being in that deep wilderness for the first time. "They're just being horses, man," I told him, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But honestly, it was more than just being horses. They were spooked, genuinely scared. We ate dinner, tried to relax around the fire, but the horses kept it up. Even the mule was restless, which is saying something. Mules are usually calmer than rocks. Went to bed in the tent, and they kept whinnying and moving around most of the night. Didn't get much sleep. Next morning, we figured we'd head up to this ridge I knew about. Overlooks a big valley where elk like to feed. Packed some lunch, rifles, water, typical hunting day pack stuff. Left the mule and horses at camp. The ride up to the ridge was quiet. Just the sounds of the woods and the horses' hooves. Beautiful country, really is. But that feeling from the night before was still there, hanging in the air like smoke, like we were being watched. We got to the ridge, glassed the valley for hours, saw a couple of does, some squirrels, birds, usual forest critters. No elk, which was a bummer, but that's hunting, you know. It wasn't even about the elk anymore, to be honest. It was this creeping feeling that something wasn't right. Mateo was starting to get jumpy too. "You feeling this, right?" he asked me, eyes darting around the trees. I just nodded. Something's out here with us. We ate lunch up on the ridge, didn't say much. The silence was heavy, not the good kind of forest quiet, more like a held breath, waiting for something to break. I kept scanning the trees, feeling like there were eyes on us, even though I couldn't see anything. It was messing with my head. I've been in combat, been in situations where you knew you were in danger, but this was different. This wasn't human danger, it was something else. Late afternoon, we started heading back to camp. The sun was getting lower, long shadows stretching out across the trail. And that's when it really went sideways. The forest just shut down, completely silent. No birds chirping, no squirrels chattering, not even the wind in the trees. Just nothing. An oppressive, crushing silence. And the horses, man, they went ballistic, started snorting and stomping like they'd seen ghosts. Their nostrils were flared, eyes rolling white. I tried to calm mine, talking to him, patting his neck, but he was wired tight. Mateo's horse was the same. They were practically vibrating with fear. Then came the smell. It hit us both at the same time, like rancid, like something had died, but worse, like rotten meat mixed with ammonia maybe, just a thick, gagging stench that filled the air. It made my stomach churn instantly. For a split second, I thought maybe it was just an elk, rutting season or something. They can smell strong. But this wasn't that. This was something putrid, unnatural, nauseating. And then the scream. God, that scream. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. It wasn't like anything human or any animal I've ever heard. It was guttural, deep and ragged and filled with pure, unadulterated rage, like something enormous and monstrous was screaming in pain and fury all at once. It tore through the silence like a shockwave, echoing off the mountains, making the air itself vibrate. The horses lost it, completely lost it. They reared up, screaming themselves, front hooves flailing in the air. Mine spun around, throwing me hard. I hit the ground, rifle flying out of my hand, wind knocked out of me. Mateo went down too, same thing. Horse just bucked him off like he was nothing. And then they were gone. Just bolted, hooves pounding on the trail, disappearing back towards camp as fast as they could run, leaving us there. Just us on the trail, in the fading light, with that scream still ringing in our ears and that horrible smell burning our noses. Unarmed, in the middle of nowhere, panic, pure ice-cold panic shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline spiking. Mateo was up too, looking around wild-eyed. "What the hell was that?" he yelled, voice cracking. I had no answer. I just knew in that instant, whatever it wasn't something we could fight with our rifles, even if we had them. This was something else entirely. Darkness was coming fast. The trees were already blurring into black shadows. We were screwed if we stayed on the trail. "Camp!" I shouted at Mateo. "We gotta get back to camp!" It was a long shot. No idea how far the horses had run, no idea what was still out there, but the camp was the only place with any gear, any hope. We started running, pushing through the undergrowth, stumbling over roots, scrambling up the trail, whatever direction we thought camp was. Didn't dare stop to try and get our bearings properly. Just had to move, had to get away from that. The forest was alive with sounds again now, but different sounds. Rustling in the bushes, snapping twigs, things moving in the trees around us, unseen. Not animal sounds, not exactly. More like heavy movement, like something big and clumsy was crashing through the woods, keeping pace with us, just out of sight. And the smell was still there, thick and cloying, like it was following us. We reached the edge of the clearing where we'd set up camp, just as full dark hit. Thank God the mule was still there. Tied to the tree, head up, ears twitching, looking towards the woods. He was nervous, but he hadn't bolted. Thank God for mules. We made it to the fire pit, or where it had been. Just embers now. Mateo and I backed up against each other, breathing hard, trying to see into the darkness. Still no rifles, just our hunting knives. Not much against whatever was out there. "We're screwed," Mateo whispered, voice tight with fear. I didn't argue. We were. Then the noises started. Not the screams again, thank God, but howls. Not wolf howls. Deeper, rougher, more twisted. Like something was trying to howl, but its vocal cords were ripped to shreds. They came from all around us, circling the camp, moving closer and further away, playing with us, mocking us, and grunts, deep, guttural grunts, like a huge animal clearing its throat, or like talking, like something was trying to speak, but it didn't have human vocal cords, just these raw, monstrous noises. The night was agony. We stood back to back, knives drawn, staring into the blackness, listening to those sounds. They came closer sometimes, rustling the bushes right at the edge of the firelight. We'd tense up, ready to fight, but nothing would come out of the darkness. Just the sounds, the howls, the grunts, the heavy movement around us, circling. At one point, we heard noises from the direction of where we'd picketed the horses. Loud crashing and thrashing in the trees, like something big was tearing through the brush. My heart dropped. I thought for sure whatever it was had gone for the horses. Imagined them screaming in terror, being torn apart. The thought made me sick. Only the fact the mule was still quiet gave me a tiny sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, whatever was out there wasn't interested in the mule. Maybe it was something else, something different. Hours crawled by. Every shadow looked like a monster. Every snap of a twig made us jump. We didn't speak, just listened, strained our eyes, waited, prayed for dawn to come. It felt like the night would never end. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noises stopped. The howls, the grunts, the rustling, just gone. The forest went quiet again. Not the oppressive silence from before, but a normal quiet. Like whatever had been out there had just left. But the fear didn't leave with it. It stayed, thick and cold in the air, clinging to us like the stench. We stayed back to back until the first hint of grey lightened the eastern sky. Then, slowly, cautiously, we started to move. Stiff, exhausted, terrified. First thing was to check the mule. He was still there, tied up, unharmed. Amazing. Then the horse picket line, empty. They were gone. No sign of a struggle, just broken ropes and empty space. Damn it. I figured the worst. They were gone, dead, eaten. But we had to check, had to at least try and find out what happened. Leaving the mule tied up, we started following horse tracks back down the trail, towards where they'd bolted the night before, and then we saw them, the tracks, not going further into the woods, but heading back towards the trailhead, back the way we'd come. What? We followed the tracks, faster now, hope flickering in my chest. Maybe they'd just run. Maybe they'd run all the way back to the truck and trailer. Impossible, right? 20 miles through rough country in the dark? But we kept following the tracks, and they led us all the way back down the mountain, through the woods, down the trails we'd ridden the day before. And then, finally, we came out onto the logging road, and in the distance, parked right where we'd left it, we saw our truck and horse trailer. And standing there, calmly grazing in the meadow next to the trailer, were our horses. Both of them. No injuries, no scratches, nothing. Just there, like nothing had happened, like they'd just decided to go for a stroll back to the truck in the middle of the night. 20 miles, in the dark, through mountain lion country, completely unharmed. We just stared at them, didn't say anything for a long time. Then Mateo just shook his head, a slow, disbelieving shake. They ran all the way back here?" he whispered. I just nodded, still trying to wrap my head around it. We packed up camp in a daze, loaded the mule, and walked back to the trailer, leading the horses like nothing was wrong. Got the horses loaded, mule in the trailer, everything packed away. Drove out of there without saying another word. We haven't talked about it much since, just this unspoken agreement to not bring it up. But I think about it all the time. What was that scream? What were those sounds in the night? What was that smell? And what the hell scared those horses so bad they ran 20 miles in the dark to get away from it? I've hunted my whole life, spent tons of time in the woods, and I've never experienced anything even close to that. And Mateo, he's seen combat, he's been under fire, he's faced down real human threats, and he says that night in the woods was the scariest thing he's ever been through. I don't have any answers. I don't know what we encountered out there in those mountains. All I know is something real and terrifying happened to us that night, and I don't ever want to go back there again. Ever. Story 11. I'd set up camp near a creek, just like the guidebook said. Place was gorgeous. You wouldn't believe the view. Sunlight filtering through the pines in the mornings, the sound of the water running over rocks all day, and the air, so clean you could taste it. First few days were textbook perfect. Tracked some sheep sign, saw a few does and fawns, the usual forest critters. Felt good, felt right. But then something shifted. It wasn't like a switch flipped, more like a dial slowly turning. Just a nagging feeling at first, like when you know you've forgotten something important but can't put your finger on it. Started at night, lying in my tent, trying to sleep. It was pitch black, darker than any black I'd ever seen. Only sound was the creek and the wind rustling the trees. Peaceful, right? Should have been. But I couldn't shake this sense of being watched, not in a rational way. I've slept in bear country plenty of times, cougar country too. I know the sounds, the rustles, the snaps. This wasn't that. This was something different, heavier, like eyes on you, but you can't see them, can't place them, just feel them. Tossed and turned most of the night. Every creak of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me tense up. My imagination running wild, I guess. But it felt real, that's the thing. It felt like something was out there, circling, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Predators are predators, they hunt. But this, it was like being studied. Not hunted, but assessed. I barely slept a wink. Woke up groggy and on edge. Made coffee, started a fire, tried to shake it off as just nerves. Maybe it was the solitude getting to me, or just being too deep in the backcountry alone for too long. But the feeling stuck with me all day. Even in the daylight, with the sun high and bright, that unease was there, a constant undercurrent. Decided to hike up a ridge to get a better view for sheep. Figured getting moving, focusing on the hunt, would clear my head. Packed some jerky, water, grabbed my rifle and headed out. The higher I climbed, the better the views got. Jagged peaks all around, valleys dropping away below, endless forests stretching out. It was breathtaking, truly, but even that beauty couldn't quite push back that creeping feeling. I was glassing a distant slope with my binoculars, looking for movement, for the telltale glint of horns in the sun. Nothing. Lowered the binos, scanned the base of the mountain I was on, more out of habit than anything. That's when I saw it. Movement. Down below, maybe 300 yards, at the edge of the tree line. Something dark and bulky moving slowly. My first thought, honestly, was bear. Grizzly, maybe, judging by the color and shape. They're not uncommon in these parts. Started to raise my binoculars again, figuring I'd watch it for a bit, see if it was just foraging or moving through. Then it stood up. Just like that, in maybe 2 or 3 slow movements, it went from hunched over to standing upright. And suddenly, it wasn't a bear anymore, not even close. It was too tall, too human-shaped, but not human. Even at that distance, through the binoculars, I could see it wasn't right. My heart slammed into my ribs. It was bipedal, no question. Standing straight up solid, like a tree trunk walking. Dark, shaggy fur or hair covering it completely. Thick neck, massive shoulders, arms hanging down way past where they should on a normal man. I froze, binoculars glued to my eyes, just staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It started walking, not towards me, thankfully, but towards a thick patch of pine forest. And it moved with a slow, deliberate stride, like it didn't have a care in the world, like it owned the mountain. Each step was long, covering ground fast. Those arms swung with it, almost touching the ground, thick and muscular, like nothing I'd ever seen before. That initial shock started to give way to something else. Fear. Real, cold, primal fear. This wasn't something I'd ever encountered in the wild. Bears, cougars, wolves, you knew what they were, how they acted, what to expect. This was alien, unnatural. My mind raced, trying to categorize it, rationalize it. Bear on its hind legs? No, the proportions were wrong, the movement wrong. Man in a suit, out here, miles from anywhere. Impossible. My brain stuttered, refusing to compute. I dropped the binoculars. They clattered against the rocks beside me. Suddenly my rifle felt like the only thing that made sense. Reached for it, safety off, chambered around. My hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding me, but my training kicked in. Found a solid rest against a rock, went prone, brought the rifle up and peered through the scope. The creature was still moving, closer to the tree line now. The magnification of the scope brought it right in front of my eyes. Every detail sharpened. The thick, dark hair, matted and coarse-looking. The sheer bulk of it, the muscle rippling under its skin with each step. It was massive, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, broader, more powerfully built. I'm not a small guy, 6'2", pushing 220 pounds, and this thing made me feel tiny, and then it stopped, right at the edge of the trees. Just before it stepped into the shadow of the pines, it turned its head and looked right at me. Through the scope, its face filled my vision, and that's what I'll never forget. Not the size, not the power, not the strangeness of it all, but the face. It wasn't animalistic in the way I expected. It wasn't snarling or aggressive. It was old, weathered, like tanned leather stretched over bone, dark skin, deeply wrinkled, especially around the eyes and mouth, eyes that were set deep, dark and intense, piercing, looking right through me, I swear, and the expression, that's what gets me even now. It wasn't anger, it wasn't threat, it was something else, something ancient, wary, knowing. And strangely, I didn't feel fear in that moment, not anymore. Terror had been replaced by something like recognition and respect. Yeah, respect. Sounds crazy, I know. Looking at this thing through a rifle scope, ready to shoot, and I felt respect. It was like looking into the eyes of something that had seen centuries pass, something that knew secrets I couldn't even imagine. That connection, that eye contact, it felt like it lasted forever, even though it was probably just seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time just seemed to stop. Then as quickly as it had stopped, it turned again, stepped into the shadow of the pines, and vanished, just like that. 1 second it was there, filling my scope, the next, nothing. Gone, like it had dissolved into the trees. I lay there, rifle still aimed at the spot where it had disappeared for a long time. Minutes maybe, felt like hours. Heart pounding, breath ragged, trying to process what I had just seen, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I knew what I'd seen. Slowly, I lowered the rifle, unchambered the round, put the safety back on, got to my feet, legs shaky, went to where I'd dropped the binoculars and picked them up, hands still trembling, looked back at the tree line, scanning every inch of it. Nothing, no movement, no sound, nothing to indicate anything had ever been there. I estimated its height, compared it to the trees around it, to the distance I'd seen it from. At least 8 feet tall, maybe more, and heavy, solid muscle. I guessed 400 pounds, easily. Broad shoulders, thick chest. The way it moved, the power in its stride, it was incredible. And the face, God, that face. I knew it had seen me too, had looked right at me, knew exactly where I was. It hadn't reacted with aggression, hadn't charged, hadn't even seemed surprised, just observed and then left like it had made a decision. I packed up camp that afternoon, didn't see any sheep, didn't even want to look for them anymore. That feeling of being watched was gone, replaced by something else, a kind of awe mixed with unease, like I'd glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see, something that existed outside of our world, in the shadows, on the fringes. I hiked back to my truck, faster than I'd ever hiked before, drove out of those mountains and didn't stop until I was back in cell service. Told myself it was just a trick of the light, stress, exhaustion, anything but what I knew I'd seen. But I knew. Deep down I knew. 2 years later. Foolish, I know, but the mountains were calling again. Deer season this time. Different valley, different area, but still Gold Bridge. Still those same damn mountains. Told myself I was being ridiculous, that what I'd seen was a fluke, that it wouldn't happen again. Tried to bury it, ignore it. Found a good spot, tracked some deer sign up a narrow, isolated valley. Sun was setting, casting long shadows. The air was cooling down fast. Felt that familiar, crisp autumn bite. Started to feel a little uneasy again. Just a faint echo of that old feeling, but tried to ignore it. Kept walking deeper into the valley. And then it happened. Sound. Started low, a rumble deep in the chest, like a growl, but way bigger, way deeper. And then it built, rising in pitch and volume, until it became a scream. A monstrous, ear-splitting scream that echoed off the valley walls, reverberated in my bones. It was unearthly. Not like any animal sound I'd ever heard in my life. Not bear, not cougar, not elk, nothing even remotely close. It was guttural, primal, furious, full of rage and warning. It was the sound of something ancient and powerful, something that did not want me there. Terror, Pure, unfiltered terror slammed into me. Every hair on my body stood on end. My blood ran cold. Instinct took over. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just turned and ran, bolted down that valley faster than I ever thought possible. Didn't look back, didn't slow down, just ran. That scream followed me, echoing behind me, chasing me down the valley. I ran for hours, it felt like, until I stumbled out onto the logging road back to my truck. Got in, locked the doors, and just sat there shaking. Listening to the silence finally, the blessed silence after that roar. I drove out of there that night, and I haven't been back since, and I never will. I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. That creature, that Sasquatch, whatever it was, it didn't want me there. The first time it observed me, assessed me, and let me go. The second time, it warned me. And I got the message loud and clear. To this day I can still see its face in my mind, those deep, dark eyes. And I can still hear that scream. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I can almost feel those eyes on me again. Out there, in the dark, somewhere in those mountains. And I know with absolute certainty that there are things in this world we don't understand, things we're not meant to see. And sometimes the wilderness keeps its secrets for a reason. And some doors, once opened, are best left closed forever. I learned that the hard way, up in those mountains. And some nights, I still wake up sweating, heart pounding, wondering if it's still out there, watching, waiting. Story 12. Okay, so it was supposed to be a normal trip, you know, like we always did. Every year, around late May, me and the guys, there were 8 of us that time, including Lennon, who always kind of led the charge, being the most outdoorsy of us, I guess. We'd head up to Pine Ridge for morals. Pine Ridge Forest in Washington State, well, it used to feel pretty normal, beautiful even. That was back in 2012. Feels like ages ago now, but some stuff just sticks with you, you know. We left early, crammed into 2 cars, all hyped up about finding a good haul of mushrooms. The drive-in was always kind of long, twisting roads going deeper and deeper into the woods. But that was part of the adventure. The air was crisp, still had that fresh spring feeling, and you could smell the earth. Like things were waking up. We were all laughing, cracking jokes, classic guy stuff. Lennon, he's always the level-headed one, the one who says he doesn't believe in any of that spooky crap. He was joking about Bigfoot and all that, saying we were more likely to find a Sasquatch than a decent patch of morals. We all laughed, you know, dismissing it as just silly talk. We parked a ways in and started hiking, going deeper on foot. Lennon knew this spot, this little hidden hillside he'd found years back. Said it was like a goldmine for morals. It was a bit of a climb, honestly, steeper than I remembered from previous years. Maybe we were all just getting older and softer. As we hiked up, the trees got thicker, denser. The sunlight was still filtering through, but it was getting dimmer, like we were stepping into a different kind of daylight. We were spread out a bit, calling out to each other when someone spotted a mushroom, you know, sharing the finds. It was all good, classic mushroom hunting stuff. For a while. Then it hit us. This smell. It was awful. Just rank. Like something dead, rotting, but mixed with something else, something sickly sweet and putrid. I don't know how to properly describe it even now. It wasn't just dead animal smell, it had this other layer, like something unnatural. We all stopped, wrinkled our noses, started asking each other if anyone else smelled it. Everyone did. It was strong, overpowering, and it hung in the air, thick and heavy. It made your stomach churn. Lennon, like I said, always the rational one, he starts saying it's probably just some animal carcass nearby. Probably a deer or something, he said, trying to sound casual. But even he looked a bit uneasy. We kept moving, trying to ignore the smell, thinking maybe we'd hike past it, that it was just a localized thing. But the smell got stronger the further up the hill we went. It was like we were walking right into the source of it. And then we heard it. This clacking sound, like rocks hitting each other. Not just rocks tumbling down a hill, random noise. This was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. Like someone was taking two rocks and hitting them together, hard, over and over. At first, we looked at each other thinking, what the hell? Maybe someone else was up in the woods, messing around. But it didn't sound like people. It was too forceful, too regular. Lennon stopped again, actually stopped walking for the first time since we smelled that awful odor. He turned, looking around. His face was different now. The joking was gone. He was listening, really listening. We all were. The forest had gone quiet, except for that clacking. Clack, clack, clack. It seemed to be coming from higher up the slope, deeper into the trees. He tried to pass it off again. Probably just some weird bird or something, he said, but his voice sounded strained. No one believed him. Birds don't clap rocks together. And then it happened again, but louder. Clack, clack, clack. Louder, closer, more aggressive. It was like whatever was making that sound was answering us, or warning us, or both. A really heavy silence dropped then, the kind where your ears start to ring. No birds chirping, no rustling leaves, just that heavy, stinking air and complete silence, except for the hammering of my own heart in my ears. We were all just standing there, frozen, looking at each other, and I could see the fear starting to creep into everyone's eyes, even Lennon's. That sound, it felt intentional, like it was meant for us to hear it, meant to intimidate. And then the branches broke. Not just a snap of a twig, not even a small branch falling. This was like a whole section of tree coming down. Crack! It echoed through the woods, so loud it made us jump. It sounded like it was right above us, maybe 50 yards uphill. But it wasn't just one branch. It was a series of cracks and snaps, like something huge was crashing through the undergrowth, tearing apart trees. It was getting louder, closer, and it was moving fast. The sound was impossible to describe properly. Imagine a freight train, but not on tracks, just barreling straight through the forest, smashing everything in its path. That was the scale of it. The sheer force of it was terrifying. We didn't need to say anything. We all knew instantly we had to get out of there. Panic. That's the only word for it. Just pure, unadulterated panic. We turned and ran. Down the hillside, stumbling, tripping over roots and rocks, not even looking back, just running for our lives. The sound was right behind us. Whatever it was coming after us. The crashing, the breaking, the raw power of it was like something out of a nightmare. I could hear guys shouting, yelling in fear, but mostly it was just the sound of our own feet pounding the ground and that thing behind us. I don't know how long we ran for. It felt like forever. My lungs were burning, my legs were screaming, but I couldn't stop. I knew if I stopped, whatever was chasing us would catch us. I could feel it. This primal fear, just absolute terror. I wasn't thinking, I was just reacting, just running. Finally, we burst out of the trees and into the clearing where we'd set up camp. We collapsed there, gasping for breath, hearts hammering, looking back at the tree line, expecting to see... I don't know what we expected to see. A monster? A bear? Something unearthly? But there was nothing. Just the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. The forest was quiet again. No crashing, no breaking, no clacking, just silence. But a different kind of silence this time. Not peaceful, heavy, oppressive. We stood there, catching our breath, shaking, looking at each other. We were all pale, sweating, and our eyes were wide. No one said anything for a long time. What could we say? We had all heard it, felt it, run from it. We all knew it wasn't just an animal. Animals don't make sounds like that. Animals don't clap rocks together deliberately. Lennon was still trying to be rational, but you could see he was shaken to the core. Maybe it was a landslide, he mumbled, but even he didn't sound convinced. Landslides don't chase you uphill, and landslides definitely don't clap rocks together. We huddled back at the campsite. We had tents set up already, thank God, because no one wanted to be outside. We built a huge fire, stoked it high, hoping the flames would keep whatever it was away. We sat around it in silence mostly, just staring into the flames, listening to the crackling fire, listening to the woods. Every snap of a twig made us jump. Every rustle of leaves made us tense up. We were on edge all night. The smell was still there, that awful putrid odor clinging to the air, even around the campfire. It was fainter here, but still there, a constant, sickening reminder. We stayed up all night, taking turns watching the fire, listening, waiting. Nothing happened, nothing came out of the trees, but the feeling, that feeling of dread, of being watched, it never went away. Dawn finally broke, grey and cold. We were all exhausted, mentally and physically drained, but we were alive. We'd survived the night. Or so we thought. As the first light crept into the camp, we started to notice something else. The smell. It was stronger again. Not just the dead rotting smell, but something else mixed in, something sharp and acrid like ammonia. It was thick in the air, even worse than the day before. It made your eyes water and your throat burn. Then we saw it, all over the campsite, everywhere, on the tents, on the backpacks, on the ground, on the fire pit, even on the picnic table we had set up. This liquid, it looked like water, but it wasn't. It was sticky, viscous, and it smelled indescribably foul, like concentrated fermented urine, but 100 times stronger. It was coating everything. It was the source of the smell, the overpowering, gagging stench. We recognized it then, that putrid ammonia smell mixed with the rotting, deathly odor. It was urine, massive amounts of urine, sprayed everywhere, like something had marked its territory, marked us, marked our camp. We didn't know what to do. We just stood there, staring at it, at each other, in stunned silence. The horror of the night before, the crashing, the chasing, the fear. It was one thing, but this was different. This was deliberate, vile, violating. We packed up camp in record time. Nobody wanted to touch anything. We just grabbed what we could, threw everything in trash bags and ran, again. But this time, it was a different kind of run, not just from fear, but from disgust, from a deep, sickening feeling of violation. We got back to the cars, drove out of Pine Ridge Forest as fast as we could, not saying a word to each other the entire way back. The smell clung to us, to our clothes, to our gear. We tried to wash it off, but it was like it was embedded in our skin, in our memories. We never went back to Pine Ridge after that. None of us. Lennon, the skeptic, he doesn't talk about it much, but I know it shook him, shook all of us. We tried to make sense of it, to find a logical explanation, but there isn't one. Not really. Not one that explains the rocks, the crashing, the chase, and that stuff coating our camp in the morning. To this day, I can't go into the woods without thinking about it. That smell, that sound, the feeling of being hunted, it stays with you, like a shadow. And sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet, I think I can still smell it. Just a faint whiff, but enough to send a chill down my spine and remind me of Pine Ridge Forest. And whatever the hell was up there with us that night, I still can't explain it. I just know we were lucky to get out, lucky to be alive. And I know, without a shadow of a doubt, something wanted us gone from that hillside. Something that wasn't human, wasn't an animal like we knew it, and was definitely not friendly. It was something else entirely. And that's the part that really messes with you. The part you can't explain, and probably never will. Story 13. Okay, so something messed up happened to me a while back, and I've been thinking about sharing it. But it still freaks me out too much to talk about, in real life. Maybe writing it out here, where nobody knows me, will be easier. This was back in 2014. It was autumn, late October maybe. Me and a few friends, Ben mostly, we're into foraging for mushrooms. We're not experts, but we know enough to be safe and find some good stuff. We'd been hitting up a few spots we knew, but they were getting picked over, so we decided to try somewhere new. Little Nature's State Park, out in Washington. I'd heard it was good, lots of woods, the kind of place mushrooms love. We packed up the car, usual gear, baskets, knives, maps, water, snacks. You know the drill. It was supposed to be a pretty normal day hike, get some fresh air, hopefully find some chanterelles or something. We got there early, parked up and headed into the woods. Right away it was different, and not in a good way. Usually when you're in the woods, especially a place like that, you hear stuff. Birds, insects buzzing, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling in the wind. Nature sounds, right? But this was quiet. Like unnaturally quiet. Dead quiet. At first I didn't really think much of it. Maybe it was just a calm morning, you know. But as we walked deeper, it got weirder. The silence just pressed in. It was like the woods were holding their breath. I started to get this uneasy feeling, like something wasn't right. I'm usually pretty good in the woods, been hiking and camping since I was a kid. I'm not easily spooked by nature. But this was different. It wasn't just the silence. It was thick, heavy, like you could feel it on your skin. I pulled out my GPS to get a sense of direction. We were aiming to go west, further into the park. But the damn GPS was acting up. It kept saying we were going east. That made no sense. I checked it again, made sure it was calibrated right. Nope. Still saying east. I even recalibrated it just in case, and nothing changed. It was insistent we were heading in the wrong direction. Ben, who's usually pretty laid back, was starting to look around a lot. "You hear that, Maya?" he asked kind of low. "Hear what?" I said. I honestly hadn't heard anything except nothing. "Exactly," he said. "Too quiet, man. Way too quiet." I took out my compass. Old school, reliable, never fails. Compass pointed west, exactly where I thought we were going. West. GPS saying east. That's just impossible. Unless the GPS was seriously malfunctioning, but it had been working fine all morning on the drive here. "GPS is screwed up," I told Ben. "Compass says west, so we're going west." I tried to sound confident, but honestly, the glitchy GPS, the oppressive silence, it was getting to me. We kept walking. The silence continued. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any more unsettling, we started hearing things. Faint sounds like bird calls. But wrong, off-key, like someone trying to imitate birds but not quite getting it right. And they were coming from behind us. We stopped and listened. There it was again, a kind of weak warbling sound, like a bird call but distorted, like mimicking. But why would a bird mimic bird calls badly behind us? And why now, in this dead quiet? We turned around. Nothing. Just trees, shadows, the usual wood stuff. But the sound had definitely come from back there. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his eyes wide. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Bird, maybe?" "Sounded weird for a bird," he muttered. "And coming from behind. We haven't seen any birds at all, have we?" He was right, we hadn't. Normally you see or hear birds all the time in the woods. But nothing. Just this eerie silence, broken only by these weird, off-kilter bird sounds behind us. We started walking again, faster now. The feeling of unease was turning into something darker, something like fear. The bird sounds stopped for a bit, and then we heard something else. A snapping sound like a branch breaking, also behind us. We spun around again, still nothing, just trees. "Okay, this is getting seriously creepy," Ben said, his voice tight. He's a big guy, Ben, not easily scared. Seeing him rattled like this, that made me even more nervous. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested. "Something's not right here." "Yeah, no kidding," he said. He looked genuinely scared now. And honestly, I was too. This was no longer just a quiet hike in the woods. This was wrong, profoundly wrong. We started heading back the way we came. But then, just as we were about to turn around completely, something moved. Just a flicker at the edge of my vision, between the trees, dark, stocky, quick, gone before I could really focus on it. "Did you see that?" I hissed. "Yeah!" Ben's voice was barely a whisper. Something moved over there. Dark thing, low to the ground. We both stared at the spot where we'd seen the movement. Nothing, just shadows. But we'd both seen it. Something had been there, watching us. I don't know. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, it hit me hard. Ben was already reaching into his backpack. He pulled out his bear spray. He's always been overly cautious. But right now, I was kind of glad he was. "Bear?" I asked, even though I knew deep down it wasn't a bear. Bears aren't stocky and dart between trees like that, and bears don't mimic bird calls or snap branches behind you. "Don't know," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Didn't look like a bear. Looked wrong." He uncapped the bear spray. "Just in case," he mumbled. And then, out of nowhere, a loud crack, like a gunshot, except not quite. More like a heavy branch snapping, really loud, but with a sharp, explosive quality. Ben jumped, startled. He accidentally squeezed the trigger on the bear spray, just a little burst of it. "Damn it," he swore. And then it happened. The thing that really, truly freaked us out. From behind us, from the direction we'd just come, we heard it. A voice, deep, guttural, and it said, clear as day, in perfect imitation of the sound of the gunshot, branch snap, whatever it was. It said, "Boom, boom," exactly like that, 2 syllables, boom, boom. Just like the sound we'd just heard, mimicking it. But it wasn't just mimicking the sound, it was mimicking us. Because we jumped at the loud crack, and then Ben's bear spray had made a tiny psst noise. The boom boom voice imitated the louder crack sound, not the bear spray. It was mimicking the louder, more threatening sound we reacted to. Ben froze. He went completely white. He turned to me, eyes wide, and mouthed, Did you say something?" I shook my head, speechless. I couldn't even breathe. My heart was hammering in my chest. My blood felt like ice water. He turned back to face the trees, the uncapped bear spray trembling in his hand. "Who's there?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Who said that?" Silence. Except, not quite silence. That heavy, oppressive quiet was still there, pressing in on us. But now it felt different, threatening, like the silence itself was listening, waiting. Ben took a step back, then another. I was right behind him, practically glued to his back. We started to back away, slowly at first, then faster. We were scrambling now, almost running, stumbling over roots and fallen branches. We didn't look back. We just ran. We ran down the trail, back the way we'd come, out of that patch of woods, towards the car, towards safety, or what we hoped was safety. The silence followed us, or maybe it was just in our heads now. I don't know. But I could still feel it, that heavy, dead silence, even as we were running. And the sound of that voice, that deep, guttural boom, boom, echoed in my ears over and over again. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. We threw ourselves inside, slammed the doors shut, locked them. Ben fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped them. He got the car started, and we peeled out of there, tires spitting gravel. We drove back in almost complete silence. The radio was off. Neither of us said a word for a long time. Ben was gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. I was just staring out the window, watching the trees blur past, still seeing those dark shadows, still hearing that voice in my head. Finally, after what felt like forever, Ben spoke. His voice was still shaky. What the hell was that, Maya?" I shook my head again. I don't know," I whispered. "I have no idea." We didn't talk about it much after that. We tried to rationalize it, of course. Tried to come up with some explanation that made sense. Maybe it was some kind of weird echo, some kind of animal we didn't recognize, some kind of prank. But none of it fit. The silence, the GPS malfunction, the bird sounds, the branch snaps, the dark shape, and then that voice. That deep, guttural voice that mimicked the gunshot sound so clearly, so deliberately. It just didn't make any sense, none of it. We never went back to Little Nature's State Park. And honestly, I haven't been mushroom hunting in the woods much since then. The thought of those woods, of that silence, of that voice, it still gives me chills. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, just flashes, shadows moving between trees, that guttural boom, boom echoing in the silence. I still can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. Part of me just wants to forget it ever happened. Pretend it was just some weird hallucination, some trick of the light and sound. But I know what we both saw, and what we both heard. And it wasn't natural. It wasn't normal. It was something else. Something in those woods that day. Something was watching us. And it spoke, and I have no idea what it was, or what it wanted. And that's the part that scares me the most. The not knowing. The feeling that there are things out there, in places like those quiet woods, things we can't understand, things that watch us, that listen to us, that maybe even mimic us. And we have no idea they're there until they let us know. And by then, it's already too late. Maybe we got lucky that day. Maybe if we'd stayed longer, if we hadn't run, maybe things would have turned out a lot worse. I don't know. And I really, really don't want to find out. I just want to forget it ever happened. But I can't. It's still there, in my head, like a shadow, waiting in the silence, waiting to say, boom, boom, again. And I know deep down that voice is still out there, somewhere in those woods, watching, listening, waiting. Story 14. It was a postcard-perfect day, the kind that makes you want to ditch everything and just be outside. Sun so bright it felt thick, almost chewable, filtering down through the leaves of the trees in Blackwood Forest, painting shifting patterns on the path. Mark and I were hiking, something we did pretty regularly to escape the everyday noise. This wasn't some manicured park. This was proper woods, right in the foothills of the Appalachians. The air was pine-scented and warm, buzzing with the low hum of insects and the occasional rustle of something unseen deeper in the undergrowth. We were talking about something stupid, probably movies or work, the usual, completely relaxed, just soaking it all in. Then it happened. It wasn't a sound or a sight, not at first. It was this feeling, like when you walk into a room and everyone suddenly stops talking and you just know something is off, but you can't put your finger on it. Except amplified, like someone had turned the volume up on the weirdness dial in my brain. The tiny hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up, and a cold shiver ran down my spine, even though the sun was beating down. It wasn't a someone's watching me feeling, not exactly. It was deeper, more primal, like my body was screaming a warning that my brain hadn't caught up with yet. I stopped walking, just dead stopped. Mark, a few steps ahead, turned back, a confused look on his face. "You okay?" he asked, probably thinking I'd tripped or something. I shook my head, not really trusting my voice yet. I tried to laugh it off, you know. Weird feeling. But it came out sounding weak and shaky, even to my own ears. I rubbed my arms, trying to physically push the goosebumps away, but they wouldn't budge. It was like the air itself had thickened, like wading through treacle. We stood there for a few minutes, me just trying to shake it off, him looking at me like I was losing it. The woods were still, too still maybe. The usual background noise of the forest seemed muted, hushed, like everything was holding its breath. I kept scanning the trees, the shadows, looking for something, anything, to explain this sudden wave of wrongness washing over me. But there was nothing. Just trees, sunlight, and this creeping dread. Then the sound ripped through the silence, and sound doesn't even begin to cover it. It was like, imagine the loudest clap of thunder you've ever heard, the kind that vibrates in your chest, but crossed with the tearing, splintering crash of a building collapsing. It was low, incredibly powerful, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ground actually vibrated under my boots. We both jumped, hearts hammering against our ribs. Mark grabbed my arm, his eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head again, feeling my blood run cold. My mind was racing, trying to process, to categorize. Earthquake? No, it was a single violent crash, not tremors. Landslide? Maybe, but it sounded different. Less like earth and rocks, more like wood. Giant, ancient wood being ripped apart. Fear, raw and instinctive, slammed into me, not the nervous jump-scare fear, but the deep, sickening dread of something profoundly wrong. Everything in me screamed, "Danger!" "We need to go," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "Now, down the mountain." Mark didn't argue. He was pale, his usual easygoing grin wiped clean off his face. We started moving, fast, almost stumbling down the path we'd been strolling along just minutes before. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot made me flinch. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my legs felt shaky and weak, but I pushed myself to go faster. I just needed to get out of those woods, get back to open ground, get away from whatever made that sound. We walked for what felt like forever, though it was probably only 20 minutes or so, adrenaline pumping through us. The forest seemed different now, darker, more oppressive. The sunlight, which had been so cheerful before, now seemed thin and weak, barely penetrating the dense canopy above. Every shadow seemed deeper, more menacing, and the silence was back, heavier than before, broken only by our frantic breathing and the pounding of our boots on the trail. Then Mark, who'd been silent for a while, suddenly stopped. "Wait," he said, a strange look in his eyes, a look that was a mix of fear and something else. Curiosity? Stupidity? I couldn't tell. I stopped too, my chest heaving, ready to tell him to keep moving, that we were almost out, just a little further. But he cut me off. "Did you ever hear about tree knocking?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I frowned, confused. "Tree knocking, what are you talking about?" He shifted from foot to foot, his gaze darting around the trees like he expected something to jump out at us. It's this thing," he mumbled. "People who spend time in the woods, sometimes they say the woods communicate by knocking on trees." I stared at him. "Communicate with what, Mark? Squirrels? Birds?" I was getting impatient. We needed to keep moving. "No, not animals," he said, looking even more uncomfortable. "More like other things, things that live in the woods, things we don't see." He swallowed hard. "I read about it online. People do it to get a response." I felt a wave of exasperation mixed with a fresh surge of fear. "Mark, are you serious? Right now? After that sound? We need to get out of here, not start knocking on trees and inviting whatever the hell is out here to chat." But he was already looking around, searching for something on the ground. Just a branch," he muttered, bending down to pick up a fallen stick. It was maybe a foot long, thick enough to make a decent sound. "Don't, Mark, just don't," I pleaded. My stomach was twisting itself into knots. The idea of deliberately trying to interact with whatever was in these woods after what we'd just heard, it was insane. He ignored me. He walked over to the nearest tree, a thick oak with gnarled bark, and turned to me, holding the branch like some kind of ridiculous wand. "3 knocks," he said, his voice still shaky, but now with a weird undertone of excitement. "That's what they say. 3 knocks to ask if anyone's there." I wanted to grab him, drag him away, run screaming down the mountain. But I was frozen. Part of me, the stupid, morbidly curious part, just wanted to see what would happen, despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to run. He took a deep breath, raised the branch, and tapped it against the tree trunk. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed in the sudden, heavy silence, just 3 sharp raps, breaking the stillness. And then, nothing. Just the rustling of leaves, the distant chirp of a bird, the hammering of my own heart. "See? Nothing," I said, trying to sound relieved, to convince myself it was over, that it was just stupid and pointless, and we could finally go. "Let's just go, Mark," He hesitated, his eyes fixed on the tree. He was pale, sweating. I could see the pulse throb in his neck. But he wasn't moving. He was waiting. And then it happened. The response. Not from the tree he'd knocked on, from further away. Deeper in the woods, 2 knocks, clear as a bell, 2 distinct raps echoing through the trees. Boom, boom, not the same sharp wooden sound of Mark's branch hitting the tree. Deeper, duller, like knuckles on thick wood or bone. My breath hitched in my throat. The blood drained from my face. Mark dropped the branch like it was burning him, stumbling back towards me, his eyes wide with pure, unfiltered terror. 2 knocks, not 3, 2. Like a reply, a response to our stupid, reckless knock. The silence that followed was not just silence. It was oppressive, heavy, suffocating. The feeling of being watched, which had been a vague unease before, now slammed into me with full force. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a certainty. We were being watched from everywhere, by something, someone, something. We didn't speak. We couldn't. We just stood there, frozen, listening, straining our ears, our eyes darting around, trying to pierce the shadows, to see something, anything. But there was nothing, just trees, shadows, silence, and that crushing, terrifying sense of unseen eyes on us. Then, very slowly, so slowly it felt like an eternity, Mark reached out, grabbed my hand, his grip like a vice. He didn't say a word, just pulled. And we ran, not walked, ran, stumbling, tripping, scrambling down the path, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. We didn't look back. We didn't stop. We just ran, driven by pure animal terror. The feeling of being watched didn't lessen. If anything, it got stronger as we ran. It felt like we were being herded, chased, not physically, but spiritually. Like invisible hands were pushing us, guiding us, down the mountain, deeper into something, even though we were trying to escape. I could hear Mark gasping for breath beside me, but I couldn't speak, couldn't slow down. My lungs burned, my legs ached, my heart hammered, but I just kept running. The image of those 2 knocks, that cold, echoing reply, was burned into my brain, driving me forward. Finally, after what seemed like hours, but was probably just minutes, we burst out of the trees, into the open, onto the gravel road at the base of the mountain. Sunlight, real sunlight, hit my face, blinding me for a moment. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. We stumbled to a halt, collapsing against each other, gasping for air. I looked back at the trees, the dark, looming wall of the forest, the place we'd just escaped from. It looked different, still beautiful in a way, but now tainted, sinister, like a beautiful painting that you suddenly realize is filled with hidden, terrifying faces. We stood there for a long time, just breathing, shaking, trying to get our bearings. Neither of us spoke. What could we say? Did you hear those knocks? Yeah, I heard them. What then? Explain it? Make sense of it? We couldn't. Eventually, slowly, we started walking towards the car we'd parked at the trailhead. Each step felt heavy, leaden. The bright sunlight and open air should have been reassuring, but they weren't. The fear was still there, clinging to me, a cold knot in my stomach. And the feeling of being watched, it hadn't gone away. Even out in the open, under the bright sun, I still felt those unseen eyes on me. We got to the car, got in, locked the doors without even thinking about it. I started the engine, put it in drive, and just drove. Fast, ignoring the speed limit, just wanting to get away, to put as much distance as possible between us and those woods. We drove in silence, for miles. Neither of us said a word. I could feel Mark's gaze on me every now and then, but I couldn't meet his eyes. I was too busy staring straight ahead, at the road, at the world speeding by, trying to outrun the fear, the memory of that sound, those knocks. We haven't talked about it much since. We've been hiking a few times, but never back to Blackwood Forest, never even close. And every time we plan a hike, I feel this hesitation, this little tremor of fear. I don't know what we heard in those woods. I don't know what answered Mark's stupid tree knocks. I don't know what made that earth-shattering sound in the first place. And I honestly don't want to know. Some things are better left unknown, buried in the silence and shadows of the woods. But sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I swear I can still hear it. Those two knocks. Boom, boom, echoing in the darkness. And I still get that feeling, that cold, prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that certainty that something is watching, still watching, even now. And I have no idea why, or what it wants. And that's the part that really gets to me. The not knowing, the utter, terrifying not knowing. Story 15. Okay, so, where do I even begin? This is, well, it's hard to talk about. It still gets to me, you know, even after all this time. People might laugh, might think I'm crazy or making it up, but I swear on everything I hold dear, this is what happened. And I need to get it out there, just tell someone who might actually understand, or at least not completely dismiss me. It all happened shortly after Sophia and I moved to Port Blossom. It's a small coastal town in North Carolina. Quiet. That's what we wanted. Away from the city noise, closer to nature. We found this cute little place just outside of town, and honestly, the best part was being so close to the Croatian forest. I know, sounds weird, right? Croatian forest in North Carolina? Apparently it was named way back for some reason. Nobody really seems to know why anymore. Anyway, it's huge, stretches inland from the coast, thick woods, mostly untouched. We love hiking, exploring, getting away from everything. So this was like paradise for us. We'd been there maybe a month, getting settled, exploring the town, checking out local trails. But we hadn't really ventured deep into the Croatian forest yet. We'd seen the signs for it, the entrances, the more popular trails that were marked and relatively well maintained. But we both had this feeling, this pull to go deeper, to see what was really in there. We kept talking about it, joking about what kind of wild stuff we might find. Bear, maybe. Deer, for sure. We'd watched enough nature documentaries to think we were prepared for anything, you know, the usual wildlife stuff. We were so wrong, so unbelievably, terrifyingly wrong. It was a Saturday night. No plans. We were just chilling at home watching some stupid movie. But the conversation kept drifting back to the forest. It was late, already dark outside, but somehow that made it more appealing, like a dare. Sophia was always more adventurous than me, egging me on. Come on, let's just go for a drive, see what it's like at night. I'm usually the cautious one, but that night, something shifted. I was feeling restless, curious too, maybe a little stupid. Just a drive? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Or are you thinking about going for a walk in the dark woods? She grinned, that mischievous grin I know so well. Maybe a little walk, just to the edge, see what's out there. And that was it. Decision made. We got ready quickly, threw on some jackets. It gets chilly at night, even in the summer here. Grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. I don't know why, grabbed my pistol. It's licensed, for home protection mostly, but I guess part of me thought, forest, dark, maybe better safe than sorry. Looking back, a pistol against what we saw? Laughable. But at the time it felt like something, anything. We drove out of town, heading towards the western edge where the forest started. The roads got narrower, tree cover got thicker, the streetlights disappeared. It got dark, really dark, and quiet. That kind of quiet that's almost deafening after you're used to city noise. Just the hum of the engine, the tires on the asphalt, and us talking, mostly nervous chatter. We found an entrance we hadn't seen before. It wasn't marked, no official sign or anything, just a break in the trees on the side of the road. A dirt track disappearing into the darkness. It looked like a logging road maybe, or just some old overgrown trail. There was a metal gate, kind of rusty and bent, looked like it hadn't been closed in years. It was open, just hanging there, one hinge busted. We pulled the car off the road, parked just before the gate, headlights shining into the dark opening of the trail. And that's when it really hit me. The atmosphere changed instantly. Inside the car, we were okay, safe, familiar. Outside, past the gate, it was different. Thick darkness, heavier somehow. The air felt colder, even though it probably wasn't. The silence intensified, swallowing up any sound we were making. It was like stepping into another world. We sat there for a minute, engine idling, headlights cutting twin tunnels into the blackness. We were talking still nervous jokes. Are you sure about this? Maybe we should just go back and watch TV, but there was no real conviction in it. We were both hooked now, curiosity overriding common sense, which, let me tell you, is a really bad combination. Then, it happened. Just as we were about to turn off the engine and maybe actually walk a few steps down that trail, I froze. Everything just stopped for me. It was like my brain short-circuited. My eyes locked on something just beyond the windshield, in the beam of the headlights, but further out, in the edge of the darkness. Sophia was talking, something about how ridiculous we were being, and then she noticed. My silence, my stillness. She turned to look at me, her smile fading. Juome, what is it? What's wrong? I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My heart started hammering in my chest like it was trying to break out. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes were wide open, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Disbelief, fear. It was all mixed together, swirling inside me. Juome, seriously, you're freaking me out, Sophia said, her voice now laced with concern. She reached out, touched my arm, and that touch surprisingly grounded me just a little bit, enough to force out a sound, a croak, really. I just saw something, I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. Saw what? What did you see? She was looking now, peering through the windshield, trying to see what I was staring at. The beam of the headlights showed only trees, dense undergrowth, shadows. Nothing unusual. At least, nothing she could see. I swallowed hard, trying to get the words out. My mouth was dry. My tongue felt like lead. Bigfoot, I finally choked out, the words barely audible, like a prayer and a curse at the same time. Silence. Then Sophia laughed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh. Bigfoot. Seriously. Juome, are you messing with me? No, I said, louder this time, my voice cracking. I'm not kidding, Sophia. I swear to God, I just saw Bigfoot. She stopped laughing, her eyes widening, finally registering the absolute terror in my face. Wait, you're serious? Like, really serious? I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the spot where I'd seen it. Or where I thought I'd seen it. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe it was a trick of the light, shadows playing games. But no, I knew what I'd seen. I felt it in my bones. Describe it, she said, her voice barely a whisper now, all traces of laughter gone. She was scared now too, I could see it in her eyes. Tall, I started, my voice still shaking. So tall, taller than anything. Like 8 feet, maybe more, covered in fur, dark fur, black maybe. It was dark. I was rambling now, trying to piece it together in my head, to make it real for her, for myself. It just walked across the gate, 2 steps, 2 huge steps, and it was gone, just disappeared into the woods. Sophia was silent for a long moment, just staring at me, then back at the dark woods beyond the gate. The silence was thick again, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. And then, very slowly, she said, "You really saw it. You're not making this up." "Sophia, I swear," I pleaded, my voice desperate. "I wish I was making it up. I wish it was a joke. But it's not. It was there." A shiver ran down my spine, just remembering the image, the sheer size of it, The dark, hulking shape moving with such unexpected speed, then vanishing as if it were a ghost. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to stay in the car, lock doors, safe, I did something incredibly stupid. I unbuckled my seatbelt. "Joan, what are you doing?" Sophia asked, her voice sharp with alarm. I need to see," I mumbled, reaching for the door handle. "I need to know if it's really gone." "Are you insane?" she hissed. "Don't get out of the car. We need to leave now." But I was already opening the door, the interior light flashing on for a brief second, then darkness swallowing it again. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and the pistol, jamming it into my waistband. Stupid, macho move, I know. But in that moment, it was all I could think of, some primal urge to confront whatever I had seen, or maybe just to prove to myself that I wasn't hallucinating. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air hitting me like a slap in the face. Sophia was calling after me, "Joan, get back in the car, please!" But I ignored her, focused on the darkness beyond the gate. I flicked on the flashlight, the beam cutting through the night, a pathetic little ray against the vastness of the forest. "Hello!" I called out, my voice sounding weak and foolish in the immense silence. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Just the rustling of leaves, the chirping of crickets somewhere far away, but up close, nothing. Deathly quiet. I took a few hesitant steps towards the gate, the gravel crunching under my boots. The flashlight beam danced nervously across the trees, the undergrowth, the dark shapes that could have been anything or nothing. Nothing. There was nothing there. No sign of anything big, hairy, or Bigfoot-like. Just trees, shadows, darkness. "See? There's nothing there," Sophia called out, her voice still trembling, but now laced with a hint of relief. "Get back in the car, let's just go. It was probably just your imagination." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was my imagination, playing tricks in the dark. Maybe I'd just been tired, stressed, whatever. But no, deep down, I knew what I'd seen. And the silence now, this absolute oppressive silence, it didn't reassure me. It terrified me. It felt wrong, like something was holding its breath, watching me, waiting. I took a few more steps, closer to the gate, shining the flashlight deeper into the woods. Still nothing. Just the impenetrable darkness between the trees. The air was still, heavy, not even a breeze. "Okay, you were right," I said, turning back towards the car, trying to sound confident, trying to convince myself. "Probably just shadows. We should go." Sophia was already starting the engine, relief flooding her face. I turned to take one last look at the woods, to convince myself that there was nothing to be afraid of, that it was all in my head. And that's when I heard it. A snap. A loud, sharp crack, like a branch breaking under immense weight. It came from the woods, just a little ways in, deeper than my flashlight beam could reach. My blood ran cold. All the fear, all the disbelief, all the shaky reassurance, it all vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. That wasn't a shadow, that wasn't my imagination. That was real. Something huge and powerful, moving in the woods, watching us. Sophia heard it too. The car engine sputtered, died. She gasped, her eyes wide with horror, locked on mine. We both knew that wasn't a deer, that wasn't anything normal. Without a word, I scrambled back towards the car, fear propelling me faster than I've ever moved in my life. I ripped open the door, dove inside, slamming it shut and locking it before I even had both feet in. Sophia was frantically fumbling with the keys, trying to restart the engine, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get them in the ignition. "Go! Go! Go!" I yelled, my voice cracking, my heart pounding like a drum solo in my ears. The engine coughed, sputtered again, then finally roared to life. Sophia slammed the gas pedal, the tires spitting gravel as we shot backwards, away from the gate, away from the woods, away from whatever was in there. We didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. We tore back down that dirt track, bounced onto the paved road, and kept driving, faster and faster, until we were miles away from the Croatian forest, back in town, back in the bright lights, back in some semblance of safety.